What you just heard was a real audio tape from one of the 67 exorcisms performed on Annalise Michel. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Well, that movie is based on a real-life case, the case of Annalise Michel. Annalise was born in 1952 in West Germany, and she was raised in a very strict Catholic household. People who knew Annalise would describe her as very quiet, deeply devoted to her religion, and very, very intelligent. At the age of 16, however, she would suffer her very first seizure and would later be diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. As the years would go on, she would begin to claim that she was hearing voices, and along with this, she started having frightening visions of what she claimed were demons. And despite her religious upbringing and her deep devotion to her faith, she started developing a deep hatred and aversion to any sort of religious object. She claimed that she could no longer pray or show her devotion to her faith because she was being tormented by evil forces. After years and years of psychiatric evaluation and medication that wasn't improving her condition, her parents involved the church. And this was because Annalise had become a danger to herself and the people in her house. She would speak in a guttural voice and would refuse to eat or use the bathroom. And over time, she just got worse and worse. So 2 Catholic priests were granted permission to carry out an exorcism on her. And between September of 1975 and July of 1976, over 60 exorcisms were carried out on Annalise. Some of these exorcisms would last several hours, and a lot of them were recorded. During the exorcisms, it was claimed that 6 demons were possessing Annalise, and these entities revealed themselves as Lucifer, who was the leader of everyone else, Cain, who was a biblical figure who was said to have committed the very first murder, Judas, who's known for betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, Nero, who was a Roman emperor infamous for persecuting early Christians, this person, and Fleischmann, who was allegedly a disgraced priest accused of several wrongdoings. As we discussed earlier, Annalise would refuse food and drink, and by the summer of 1976, her condition had become critical. She was extremely malnourished and dehydrated, and along with this was covered in cuts and bruises that she inflicted upon herself, both during and after the exorcisms. And Annalise would sadly pass away on July 1st of 1976, weighing only 68 pounds at the time of her passing. And this entire case was so controversial that it led to a court trial in 1978. The prosecution argued that medical treatment could have saved Annalise and that the exorcisms should have stopped long before her passing, and the defense argued that Annalise was genuinely possessed and was beyond any sort of medical help. And those audio tapes that I mentioned earlier of all of these exorcisms were actually played in court. These audio recordings were so disturbing and shocking to listen to that this case became international news. This trial lasted only 3 days, and in the end, both her parents and the 2 Catholic priests who carried out the exorcisms were charged with negligent homicide. They each served a 6-month prison sentence and were placed on probation for 3 years. And even to this day, this case remains deeply divided. Many Catholics will still argue that Annalise was genuinely possessed and that was the reason for her passing, while psychiatrists and historians will point to epilepsy, severe depression, and religious psychosis. This case will definitely remain one of the most well-known and controversial of all time. And while the story and the audio tapes might be disturbing to listen to, Annalise was a real person, with very real suffering and a very tragic passing. Whether you see her case through the lens of faith or mental illness or something that just cannot be explained, I think more than anything, Annalise's story is a reminder to approach these cases with empathy, and to remember that sometimes it's not even about finding the correct answer to everything, it's about understanding the complexity and the severity of any given tragic situation and then truly learning something from it.
What is the creepiest thing that has ever actually happened to you? One time I was pumping gas and was approached by a couple who said they needed a ride. Their car had broken down and they needed to go about a mile up the road to get to their friend's work. Their destination was on my way, so I agreed to take them. I pull out my phone and half jokingly say, "Okay, well, I'm just gonna send a picture of you guys to my friend to make sure that you don't rob me or something." They both simultaneously turn and walk away. They don't say a word. I yell out, "Hey, you're going the wrong way to get to your destination." The man flips me the bird and they keep walking, neither to where they said their car was, nor where they wanted to go. I was 12 years old, my grandmother was sick in the hospital, and I was in the mall with my two older cousins trying to clear our heads and get away from the grief for a while. An older gentleman walked up to us smiling and handed one of my cousins a piece of paper. It read, "Why didn't the family answer the door?" We looked at the man confused and he gave us a second piece of paper, still smiling. It said, "Because they were already dead." He then giggled and walked away. My cousins grabbed me by the hands and basically ran with me all the way back to our car. We were so desperate to get to the hospital where we wouldn't feel so alone and vulnerable. I still have goosebumps when I think about that weird man and the creepy way he laughed and smiled at us. Last year I had the most vivid experience. I was sleeping, but I felt like I was half awake and wasn't sure if it was a dream or not. I was laying on my side looking at the wall. The open spot in the bed next to me suddenly started filling with the shape of a body. I blinked and instantly the most terrifying face appeared right in front of my face. It was a girl's face and she had the most evil grimace. I instantly sat up and it disappeared. That's probably the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me in a supernatural sense. My mother died from a heart attack. It's uncommon to occur in women compared to men, but it does happen, and it brought my family's world to a halt. At her funeral, someone came up to me and said, "It's your fault she died." If someone had punched me in the gut, I'd been more responsive. I was completely stunned. A handful of friends and family heard the comment. Nobody recognized the person, and apparently the commenter left the funeral immediately afterwards. When I was 11, I was staying at my stepfather's house. According to him, the house we were staying in had some people die in it or on the property. One night, I'm watching a show in my parents' room, and eventually I get tired and decide to go to my bed. My bedroom is upstairs, and to get upstairs, I pretty much have to walk through the living room and past the dining room. I walk towards the stairs, and suddenly I see this guy in the corner of the living room by the window. He looks to be 6 feet tall and quite skinny. He's wearing a formal suit, similar to what a magician would wear. He's smoking and using a smoking pipe, and slowly turns to face me. I'm petrified and on the stairs, and I'm staring at him. Eventually, I run back into my parents' room and lie there, expecting for him to come in there until the morning. When my parents wake up, I tell them what happened. They blame it on my imagination, but later that day, we noticed the front door was unlocked. Didn't happen to me, but to my sister. She was in Russia in the early 90s as a foreign exchange student and was taking a walk with a few classmates down an old country road. They came across a farm, and every single animal was dead. Horses, cows, pigs, dogs, even birds. They were all scattered about like they had dropped dead where they stood. No blood, no apparent cause of death. Then a man on horseback came riding up to them, shouting at them in Russian to leave now. She never did find out what happened to all of those animals. Let me know in the comments what you think of these stories from Reddit and if you want me to read more of them.
This person doesn't know if their dreams are weird or not, but sometimes they continue on. Let's just say he goes to sleep, has a dream. If he goes to sleep the following night, it'll just continue where it left off. So there was one night in the process of him having this dream where this duende was trying to escape. And as the duende escaped, the duende turned around, looked at him and said, "I'll be back." Weeks passed. He ends up going to bed, having this dream of the same duende, and the duende tells him, "I told you I'd be back." I have chills. What the No, I don't want to have dreams like that. This girl says that last year she had a dream that her brother had passed away. In the dream, they had called her and told her, "Hey, your brother is no longer living." She remembers that even in the dream, they were having the funeral. His coffin was white, it had silver finishing, and as she got closer to the coffin to look at her brother is when she wakes up from the dream. She immediately grabs her phone when she wakes up to text her brother to see if he's okay. Not even 5 minutes later, she gets a phone call from her best friend, and her best friend tells her that her brother her passed away. When she goes to the funeral, her best friend's brother's coffin is white with silver finishing, just like in her dream. This lady says that she was having sleep paralysis, and in her ear somebody kept telling her, wake up, your baby, wake up. At that point, her baby was only 1 month old, and she thought maybe something was happening to her baby. When she was finally able to control her body, like get up and move, she sits up and sees that her baby is all the way down the edge of the bed. She believes that something was definitely trying to take her baby. I hope I never have dreams like this. I mean, no, I do have dreams like this, which is so annoying. Like, I don't know why. I've had a dream, think Evil Dead, where people are being possessed, they're trying to end me. But the thing was that I had already had that dream. I'm having the dream that I've already had in the past. Like, I've already dreamed about this. Everything was happening the exact same way. And I am in my dream telling everybody, this already happened. Why are you guys not running? Why are we still doing here? Like, let's get the hell out of here before things get worse. Nobody was listening to me. One by one, everybody ended up getting, even though I told them they were, nobody listened to me. But I hate the fact that I had the same dream. Like, I've already had this dream before. Everyone's like possessed and trying to kill each other, and I'm just like, I'm gonna die, because that's how the last dream ended. And guess what? I did, because nobody listened to me. And the moment where like I'm running and someone's chasing me is like, I wake up because they had literally like STABBED me. But anyway, how are your dreams?
Nurses on night shifts, absolute heroes. I know for a fact some of you have worked a night shift and seen something you cannot fucking explain. I know because my cousin's one here, right? My cousin works nights at a care home in Eccles. Been doing it 15 years, wiped more arses than a BD. Nothing rattles this woman. She's watched people die in her arms. She's tough as old fucking boots. So she's on a night shift, one of those little care homes, right? Old building, converted house, 12 residents, most of them not all there anymore, if you know what I mean. It's about 3 in the fucking morning, dead quiet, just her and one other carer. And the other one's asleep in the break room because that's what they do. Now here's the thing, she says every night, same time, one of the residents, an old bloke called Arthur, 90 odd, don't speak, hasn't spoken in years. Every night at 3:30, he sits bolt upright in bed, eyes open, staring at the door, and he starts fucking humming. Same tune every single night. She thought now of it at first, old people are weird, dementia does mad things. Fair enough. But this particular night, she's doing her rounds and she notices all of them are sat up. Every fucking resident, 12 of them, all sat upright in the dark, all facing the doors, all humming the same tune. People who can't feed themselves, people who don't know their own names, all in sync. Like a fucking choir, because how do people who can't remember their own kids all know the same song? So she stands there in the corridor and she says the humming just stops all at once, like someone flicked a switch. And then she hears it downstairs, knock, knock, knock on the front door. 3 knocks. Now the front door's locked from the inside, keypad, no one gets in without the code, and it's 3:30 in the morning in the middle of fucking Eccles. She goes down, nothing on the little camera by the door, empty step, but the knocking's still going. Knock, knock, knock. From the other side of the door, showing a fucking empty porch. And behind her on the stairs, she hears one of the residents, Arthur, the one who hasn't spoken in years, clear as day. He goes, don't let him in, love. He knocks every night. We just don't answer. She turns around, he's stood at the top of the stairs, 90 years old, can't walk without a frame, standing there with no frame, smiling. And every other bedroom door on that landing is open. All of them stood in the doorways, smiling in the dark. The knocking stopped at 4 on the dot. She checked the log every night, 3 to 4. She never told anyone official because who'd fucking believe her? Says she doesn't want to think about it. So next time you're up at 3 and you hear a knock, do us a favour, don't fucking answer it.
Tonight's spooky story comes from a bridal shop owner who thought she would be doing some alterations on a vintage gown, but she soon found out the dress had something else attached. So grab a blanket, maybe a snack, and get settled in for tonight's Midnight Confessions, Stories from the Dark. For nearly 15 years, I owned a small bridal boutique in an old brick shopping district. We sold new gowns, but most of my work involved alterations on gowns ranging from brand new to decades-old heirlooms. That's why I was excited when a woman named Carrie contacted me about her family's wedding gown. Her mother came with her to her first appointment, carrying the dress inside a yellow garment bag. The gown had originally belonged to Carrie's great-grandmother. Carrie's grandmother and mother had worn it years later followed by one of Carrie's aunts. The dress itself was beautiful. It had an ivory lace bodice, a high neckline, long fitted sleeves, and a full satin skirt covered by 2 layers of delicate lace. It smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. During the first fitting, I pinned the bodice and measured the hem while Carrie stood on the raised platform in front of the 3-way mirror. The dress needed to be shortened by exactly 3.5 inches. After Carrie and her mother left, I placed the gown on a padded hanger and began working on it the following morning. Nothing seemed unusual until I reached the hem. As I removed the old stitches, I noticed the inner layer was slightly damp, so I hung the skirt open and allowed it to air out. By the next day, the dampness was gone. I shortened the gown, replaced the original stitches, and pressed the hem flat. When Carrie returned for her second fitting, the waist and sleeves fit perfectly, but the skirt did not. I asked Carrie to remain on the platform while I measured it again. The dress was nearly 3 inches too long. The skirt had somehow become longer without the hem changing. I repinned the correct length and told Carrie I would redo the hem before her next appointment. Before she left, I measured every side twice and wrote the numbers directly on the alteration tag. A week later, the dress was too long again. While we were examining the gown, Carrie suddenly stepped off the fitting platform. She lifted the skirt and rubbed one ankle. She said something underneath the dress had brushed against her leg. I ran my hands between the satin, lining, and lace, searching for loose thread, wire, or anything else that could have touched her. There was nothing. When I lowered the skirt, I noticed a thin brown line along the hem. It looked like mud. I cleaned the satin and left the dress hanging in the workroom overnight. The following morning, the mud had returned. It was darker than before and slightly damp. When I leaned closer, it smelled like wet soil. I cleaned the hem again and continued with the alterations. At Carrie's next appointment, her mother could not attend, so Carrie arrived alone shortly before closing. Carrie put on the gown and stepped onto the platform. The hem was too long again. I knelt in front of her and began placing new pins along the skirt. Carrie wore white fitting shoes with low heels, and directly behind them were 2 bare feet. They were narrow and unnaturally pale, with gray dirt packed around the toenails. The toes angled inward, and the skin looked wrinkled from moisture. They shifted closer to Carrie's shoes. I jumped backward. I told Carrie not to move and reached for the front of the skirt. I lifted it as high as I could, but only Carrie stood on the platform. I checked behind her, beneath the train, and between every layer of fabric, but the feet were gone. Carrie became frightened when I told her what I had seen. She wanted to remove the dress immediately, but as she reached for the buttons, something pulled hard on the back of the gown. Her body jerked backwards. I grabbed her arm before she fell from the platform. For several seconds, the train stretched tightly behind her as though someone had taken hold of it from beneath the fabric. Then it released. Carrie stepped out of the dress and refused to put it on again that evening. After Carrie left, I placed the gown on a mannequin in the fitting room. I locked the front door, turned off the display lights, and went into the workroom to gather my things. Before leaving, I passed the fitting room one last time. The dress was no longer hanging correctly on the mannequin. I stepped into the room and switched on the lights. The 3-way mirror reflected the dress from several angles. In the side mirror, I saw a woman crouching beneath the train. Most of her body was hidden inside folds of fabric. Matted brown hair covered her face, and her thin arms were wrapped tightly around the mannequin's legs. I turned toward the dress, but no one was there. When I looked back into the mirror, the woman had raised her head. Her hair was plastered around the shape of her face. I could make out shallow hollows of her eyes and the curve of a smile beneath it. I ran from the fitting room and locked myself in the workroom. I stayed there until the shop had been silent for several minutes, then gathered my things and left without looking at the mannequin again. I called Carrie the next morning and told her everything. After what she had felt during the fitting, she already believed something was wrong with the gown. We agreed to meet one more time so she could collect her shoes, veil, and jewelry she had left at the boutique. Her mother came with her. Carrie's mother initially resisted the idea of abandoning the dress. It had been in her family for decades, and she believed there had to be a rational explanation. But Carrie refused to wear it again. As I lifted the skirt to show her mother the mud and water damage, I noticed a stiff bulge beneath the embroidered flowers circling the train. It sat several inches above the hemline, between the satin and the inner lining. I pressed against it and felt something coarse shift inside. Then I grabbed my fabric shears and opened the hidden seam. Something dark spilled onto the floor. Long strands of human hair had been sewn inside the hem. Some were braided together, while others had been wrapped around tiny bundles of dried flowers. Mixed among them was a strip of yellowed fabric covered in old brown stains. The stitches holding everything in place were much older than any alterations I had made. Neither Carrie nor her mother could explain what we had found. They decided they no longer wanted the dress and asked me to dispose of it. I almost refused, but then I realized that if I didn't, they likely wouldn't dispose of it properly. Something like this needed to be buried. Behind the shopping district was a neglected stretch of wooded land that separated the shops from the next neighborhood. That evening after closing, I placed the dress inside 2 heavy garment bags and carried it deep into the trees. I dug until the hole was deep enough that no fabric remained visible, then buried the dress with the hair, flowers, and stained cloth still inside the hem. I never saw the woman beneath the dress again. Well, I guess that's it. I'm adding heirloom dresses to my very long list of things that I no longer trust. But what do you think the lady beneath the dress was? Let me know your theory in the comments. As always, thanks for spending the night with me, and if you love spooky stories, be sure to follow for more Midnight Confessions.
If you pulled over in the middle of nowhere and heard your own voice calling back to you from the woods, would you stay long enough to find out who was talking to you, or would you get out of there? Well, this story was sent to me by a follower named Jose, and after reading it a few times, I honestly debated whether or not I really wanted to share it, only because, it is really out there, and as always, there's no way for me to verify what he actually experienced, so take it as entertainment and you can decide for yourselves. Now, according to Jose, this happened only a few months ago, and he says he still refuses to drive that stretch of highway after dark. He's done it a couple of times, but he really tries to avoid it. Now, Jose had been driving home late one night after visiting family, and his GPS had taken him down a deserted highway that cut through miles of dense forest. And it wasn't like the kind of road that people, used unless they absolutely really had to. Now, there were no streetlights, no gas stations, no houses, and for nearly 40 minutes, he hadn't passed another vehicle. It was just him, the road, and an endless wall of trees that was on either side of him. But about halfway through that drive, his dashboard chimed and the tire pressure light came on. And at first, he ignored it like many of us do, and figuring, you know what, I'll make it to the next stop, I'll be fine. But after another mile or so, he noticed that the steering wheel started to jerk a little bit, and he's like, you know what, I don't want to risk blowing out on this, middle of nowhere road. Let me just get out and check. So he found a small gravel shoulder just wide enough for him to pull onto. He shut off the engine, grabbed the tire gauge, and proceeded out and started to check on the tires. And immediately the silence hit him. It wasn't this peaceful silence. It was the kind that makes you realize just how alone you actually are. And the only sounds were insects somewhere, out in the distance, and the faint ticking of his engine cooling down. The tree line was incredibly close, maybe about 10 feet behind his vehicle. And because his headlights only illuminated the first few row of trees, everything beyond them disappeared into complete darkness. And he knelt beside the front driver's side tire and, started to check the pressure. And it was a little low, but nothing serious. And as he stood up to move to the next tire, he heard what sounded like someone running. Not toward him, not like away from him, but just back and forth. And the footsteps stayed just beyond the trees, and they were moving parallel to the road as if someone was sprinting from left to right, and then immediately turning around and running back again the other way. Jose said it sounded unmistakably bipedal, and it was heavy enough to be a person, but strangely rhythmic, he said. Almost like whatever it was wanted him to know that it was there without ever stepping into the open, and that it was watching. He froze, and the footsteps would stop immediately, and for several seconds there wasn't a single sound. He convinced himself that it had to be a deer or maybe some other animal. It didn't sound like one, but in that moment he was just trying to rationalize what was happening to try to calm himself down. So he walked to the next tire, and the running would start again. This time it sounded a little bit closer to him. So Jose swung his flashlight toward the wooded area where he was hearing it, sweeping across, but all he found were trunks, branches, and complete darkness. Trying to, sound calmer than he felt and be a little assertive, he called out, "Who's there?" And there was no answer. Not even the footsteps replied. And the silence that followed was somehow worse, I feel. He kept checking the tires, telling himself, "I'm almost done." But then the sounds changed. The running stopped altogether, and it was replaced by faint whispers drifting through the trees. And he couldn't make out any words. It sounded like multiple voices speaking just quietly enough to stay unintelligible. And every few seconds, one of the whispers would trail off into a soft giggle. And Jose said that was the moment that he knew that something wasn't right here, and whatever was making these sounds never came any closer, but it also never moved away from him. It just stayed hidden just beyond the tree line, almost pacing him as he was working his way around his vehicle. And by the time that he reached the last tire, his hands were shaking so badly that he actually dropped the tire gauge twice. And every instinct in his body told him to get back in the car and leave. But he was already there, he had one more tire left, and he's like, "You know what, I'm just gonna get this done." So he checked it as quickly as he could, and then he slowly stood up, and without taking his eyes off of the wooded area, he began backing toward the driver's side door. And that's when he heard it, clear as day. "Who's there?" Jose said his stomach dropped instantly because it wasn't just someone repeating what he had just called out. It was his voice, the exact same tone, the exact same inflection, everything, and exactly the way that he said it only moments earlier was now being repeated. He described it as hearing like a recording of himself played back from somewhere inside of this dark forest. His body reacted before his mind could. He said he yanked out his phone from his pocket, pointed it toward the direction that the voice had come from, and snapped a quick single picture before jumping back into his vehicle. He locked the doors, threw it into drive, and he sped out of there as quick as he could. And he didn't stop until he reached a gas station, which was about 30 minutes away. Only then did he remember the photo. His mind started to calm down a little bit. So he opened it up, expecting nothing more than a blurry picture of trees illuminated by his headlights. And at first, that's exactly what it looked like. But when he zoomed in on the area where he had heard the voice, he noticed something standing just inside the tree line. And it was the image was very grainy, far too blurry to identify really any features. But it didn't need to be because the outline was unmistakable. It was a human-shaped figure standing perfectly still, partially hidden behind the trees, exactly where this voice had come from. And Jose swears that, there hadn't been anyone else standing there when he looked with his own eyes, but yet somehow his phone had caught something that was watching him from the darkness. So, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, if you've experienced anything like this. I know that some cultures or states, they call them a mimic or a rake, a skinwalker. So let me know what you guys think in the comments if you've experienced this before.
Have you ever seen something you can't explain? I know that I have, and the listener who sent me this story absolutely did. This story is really creepy, and I cannot wait to share it with you guys. So you know the drill. Grab a drink, grab a cozy blanket, and settle in while I tell you a scary story out in my garden. After dark. Welcome to Ghosts in the Garden. I am a huge fan of your page and wanted to share my own story. It's pretty short, and I don't know if it's worth sharing, but I wanted to anyways. As someone who has always been interested in the paranormal, but has never seen anything out of the ordinary, this experience was very scary. I hope to provide enough detail to make it all make sense. A couple years ago, when I was maybe 26, I was working the closing shifts at a kitchen in a brewery. When we get out early enough, we would usually go across the street to the industry bar and have a drink. Or sometimes we would meet at one of our apartments if it was too late. Most nights, we were out until about 2 or 3 a.m. The brewery didn't open until 3 p.m., so we all had a pretty messed up sleep schedule. I wouldn't say I have insomnia, but I am a night owl. So even after returning home from a night out, I would hang out on my porch for a bit if the weather was comfortable enough. I'm a smoker, so often I would sit out there for an hour or so before bed, smoking and scrolling on TikTok. While I admit that smoking the special tobacco makes me paranoid sometimes, the feeling that happened that night felt heavier than paranoia. Another important piece of information is that I was out every single night late at night and frequently had people walking by. No alarm bells were ever raised, and I have never felt unsafe here. I live on a very busy main road, but this night it was very quiet on my street, and I could hear these scuffling footsteps approaching. Out of nowhere, my chest got very tight like it does before I have a panic attack, and my brain started telling me to be quiet over and over. Genuinely, my inner monologue sounded panicked. I had the strongest gut feeling I have ever had in my life that I should make sure whoever was approaching did not know that I was on the porch. I shut my phone off, quickly stomped out my cigarette, and crouched down to hide my head and upper torso. Our porch had beams, and late at night, unless you stopped and were actively looking for me, you wouldn't see me behind the beams in my all-black clothing. While I'm waiting, I can hear the footsteps getting closer, and it's less of a scuffling and more of a dragging. Like whoever it is has a limp foot they're dragging behind them. I'm watching the street from behind the beams when a figure becomes visible under a street lamp. The figure looked like a human, but everything was a little off, including its gait and the speed at which it was walking. It's really hard to describe without showing you, but the best way I can describe it is how it walked was like a giant or large creature that CGI is really bad. It almost looked like it was in slow motion by half a second because the body was so big. A lumbering motion, if you will. And I was right. Despite it being able to walk on 2 feet as it moved, it was dragging a foot along the ground with each step. It was tall, probably taller than my partner, who is close to 6'6", with a long neck and arms that were so long they brushed just above its knees. It was bald on the top, but had stringy blonde hair starting at its ears, that even from my porch I could see was greasy and dirty. It was unnaturally skinny, but not like in a, oh maybe this person has a disorder kind of skinny. Not a human skinny. Its eyes were bulbous, too sunken, and its skin was covered in open sores. I stayed completely silent, even covering my mouth at one point until it reached the end of the block. At this point, unless it had really good vision, it shouldn't be able to see me on the porch this late at night, and it definitely shouldn't be able to hear me as I raised my head. I had been watching it walk the entire time and waited until it felt safe, but as soon as I raised my head above the porch, it stopped walking. It straightened its neck and turned its head to the right, making a motion that with my limited vision looked like it was sniffing the air. Then it stopped, mid-sniff, and slowly turned its head around. And I swear, despite the darkness and low visibility, it made direct eye contact with me and smiled. I ran into my apartment as fast as I could, locked everything, shut off all the lights, and stayed crouched behind the window for about an hour until I couldn't stay awake anymore. Thankfully, nothing else happened, but I've never had such a fear in my life, not even when I was in actually dangerous situations. I've now moved to a part of the country that is technically in Appalachia, but needless to say, I do not linger outside when I smoke anymore. I don't know if you can see, but I quite literally have goosebumps right now because that story was horrifying. I used to sit out on my patio when I lived in an apartment, and if that passed by me while I was sitting out there, I don't know what I would have done. And I have not a clue what that creature could have been. If anyone has an idea, please leave it in the comments because I really want to know, and I truly have no idea what that could have been. If you have your own story to share, please feel free to send it over to me in an email. Otherwise, I will see you out here in my garden in the dark for another scary story soon. Bye.
The person that sent me this story called it True Story About a Neighbor and Aliens. By the way, if you have a story that you'd like to share with our glitch community about glitches in the Matrix, dreams, aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, you can send it to this email address. And remember, we believe you. Hi, Jess. Hi. I love watching your videos, and I do have some stories worth telling, but never got the courage to share them. I finally decided to write you about one of them that happened where I live, not exactly to me, but to someone I know in our community. This happened some time ago, maybe around 2010. To put some context to it, I live in a relatively small island that it's still mainly rural, even though we do have a lot of tourism. So it's an understatement to say that we usually know each other, neighbors and everything. Also, many of us still live in the countryside. This means that a lot of us are agricultors and we also keep animals. This may seem unrelated right now, but I swear later you'll understand why I'm telling you this. So about 15 years ago, one of my best friend's neighbors went viral, local level because he spoke local language that it's not even official in the country, for a video where he talked about aliens. In the video, he explained that he was working on his land with his tractor late at night about 1 a.m. When city folk saw the video, a lot of them thought the man was just joking because they said no one could possibly be working on their land at that hour. But the truth is that because it was summer and it gets really hot here during the day, a lot of us do work heavy late at night. Heavy work late at night. I said that backwards. Basically, he said that while he was working with his tractor, he saw a strange vehicle that he described in his literal words as a microbus without wheels and with a central mouth that was about 30 centimeters in diameter. This vehicle approached his property at night. At first, he was somewhat scared because he thought that these were bad men coming from him, so he kept quiet as he could and he observed what happened. Two men wearing suits appeared at the vehicle's door. One of them jumped out and put a little bit of dirt on the man's land in a tinfoil and looked at the other, who just nodded. Then the strange man simply entered the vehicle again and they left without doing anything more. He thought that he had seen two aliens who looked exactly like humans steal dirt to analyze later. Well, that's the story that he told that made the local news and transformed him into a meme known all across the island. Almost nobody took him seriously and he was publicly ridiculed. Oh my God, I feel so bad for him. I'm so sorry. But the strange things started happening now. As I said before, he was my best friend's neighbor. They used to know him pretty well, and I can assure you that this man was not a liar for fame, nor was he crazy or anything like that. After the video aired and he was mocked, this man went to my best friend's house to talk to their parents about a concerning event that had happened shortly after the video went viral. He told them that he discovered that aliens were walking among us, perfectly disguised as humans, and that they had two bases on our island. He didn't know why they needed dirt or why they wanted to analyze it, but when the video aired at local channels, apparently these aliens thought that he was a menace to the society that they were building. This is where things started to get creepy. He told my friend's parents that the aliens were trying to silence him, and that one night, two men also wearing suits visited him and gave him a suitcase full of cash in exchange for keeping his mouth shut and never again filming a video about what he saw that night. Whether he accepted it or not, he did not tell my friend's parents. The last thing he told them is that he was scared and they were going to kill him to secure silence and that he didn't know what to do. They didn't find any solution, and in the end, he went back home somewhat resignated. Hold on, are these men in suits the aliens? Or are these men in suits like the men in black, basically government officials or whatever officials that are trying to keep the alien stuff at bay and like not known by the public, and they're trying to pay him off and threaten him with violence? About a week later after this visit, police found him dead of a heart attack, alone in a boat in the middle of the sea. What? Oh my God, I literally have chills right now. Are you fucking kidding me? Mind you, this man was an agricultor, not a fisherman, and he never enjoyed fishing or anything like that. He didn't own a boat. So why was he alone at sea in a boat that was not his? This no one has ever been able to explain. But there's a little bit more to this story. Oh my God. Okay. My husband's aunt is a really good friend of this man's daughter, and she experienced something that could be related to what happened 15 years ago. So because this man died, the daughter here dated everything he owned as she doesn't have no siblings. Well, a year after her father's death, she finally decided to reformate the house as it was a pretty old countryside house. Everything seemed normal at first, but when this lady started moving the things in his father's room, he found something strange. The closet in his room seemed to have a false ceiling. So intrigued, she started banging on the ceiling, and when it came off, thousands of bills started falling down as if it was raining cash. This is what she told my boyfriend's aunt. So if what this woman is told is true, this means what the man told my friend's parents about the suited men visiting him and exchanging cash for silence was also true. I can't confirm the veracity of this story to you, but I firmly believe that this really happened. Whether it was aliens or something he was simply not supposed to see, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and saw something that shouldn't have been kept a secret. This was a beloved man with a family and neighbors that loved him. He wasn't crazy, he wasn't a liar, but nobody believed him, and he died being mocked for the video that he went viral for. Even today, new generations still love to watch that video and make fun of him, but nobody knows what happened in reality, as what I told you, as you can see, is only known by the people most close to the affected family. I hope you like the story, and I can assure you everything I wrote, I believe with all my soul. I wouldn't have written you if I thought that this was just made up story, as my information fonts are literally people I know firsthand. And first of all, I want to tell you, don't you worry, we believe you. Second of all, I want to say, I'm kind of scared. Should I be sharing this video? Because are they going to come for me? Are the men in suits going to come for me? I 1000% believe this, but like I said, I don't know if these men were aliens or not. Have you heard of alien men like dressed in suits? Like aliens that look like humans dressed in suits? They could have been, but they also could have been men in black. Was it the same? I don't remember if they said, was it the same men the first time taking the dirt and the second time, or were they just all men in suits? Because maybe the first time it was like the aliens taking the dirt, and then the second time it was like the government officials being like, shut the fuck up. I don't know. I don't know. This is crazy. I definitely believe it because there are so many stories of people like literally either disappearing or dying or something after talking about something that happened like this. And it's so crazy and so scary. I couldn't even. I was not expecting that. I was not expecting that. I can't. You guys need to let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for sharing this story.
People often say you should be more afraid of the living than the dead when I'm telling ghost stories, which is a very valid point. But what if the two blended into one? Well, the following story I was told recently has really sat with me as being quite spooky, because imagine somebody that was particularly unpleasant to you or abusive in life. You know, you suddenly feel there's a reprise from them when they've died. But what if there isn't? So this story goes, it's on the outskirts of Liverpool, and it was told to me recently, and it happened in the 1990s. So it was a lady who had moved in to look after her father who'd become unwell. Now, he'd been horrible to her throughout her entire life. Never physically abusive, but nasty, belittling, never proud of her, you know, being generally quite cruel. And she, despite, the relationship, she still moved in to look after him in his latter years when he wasn't so well. Which, hats off to her. I think many would have, perhaps looked at care homes, etc. So I said to her, well done. Anyway, she was also in quite a negative relationship at this time. The two weren't living together or anything like that because, of course, she'd moved into her father's. So, of course, he'd scream and shout at her, call her all the names under the sun. Nothing was ever good enough. He never liked any of her boyfriends, but she said the one she was with at the time was a waste of space, but she was putting up with him simply because she had that much going on with her father. She needed somebody to rely on, regardless of how they were. And I think some of us can relate to that from our histories, can't we? When you're in something bad, but you're not in a good place yourself, you do allow things to pass or put up with people that normally you'd have been like, get out. So I kind of understood what she was saying about there. I hear things like that a lot. Anyhow, the father eventually succumbed to his illness and died. And she said, I felt a great sense of relief. And I said, that's not bad at all. People deal with grief differently, and we've all had different paths leading up to that person passing away. It's not all a loving, parental relationship. I completely understand. So she goes on to then say a partner then began to stay at the house because she inherited it. He was never allowed before because of the father. And things were not good between them two anyway. And he was starting to complain about a horrible presence in the house, saying it smelt of death all the time. Saying he could feel her father in the room, which was really spooking her out and scaring her. And, they had had an argument one night. She made him sleep in the spare room, which used to be the father's room. She didn't tell him that. And he claimed the father appeared out the wardrobe. Now, again, she didn't believe a word of it. She thought it was just his way of being nasty to her again and trying to scare her because it was a new house. So that's how it went. Them two eventually split up, and it was all because he was saying that the father was still in the house somewhere and he could smell death all the time. She thought it was because it was just a toxic relationship, so she didn't miss him. Anyway, a couple of months later, she meets another nice man, completely by accident, actually, at a bookshop. How romantic. And the two begin seeing each other, and he, a complete gentleman, comes round for a meal at her house one night when she's cooking for him, and says, I'll stay in the spare room. Want to take things slow, she's been through a rough patch, and she really appreciated that. So he did. But then she's woken up by a loud scream and something crashing loudly in the middle of the night. She bursts into the bedroom. He's frightened in the corner of the room, and the lamp is smashed on the floor. What on earth happened? He said, an old man, has just come out the wardrobe and flew over to me and wrapped his hands around my throat. He said, I don't know how he had the strength. He looked 80 odd, but clasped his bony fingers around my throat. It was choking me. I threw him off, and he just vanished into the shadows somewhere. So he still thought he was in the room. He thought this was a living man. So she knew straight away then, this isn't all just hocus pocus, if you will. There's something going on. And she said when she entered the room that night, she also felt her father's presence in the room, this time herself. So following that, she wanted nothing to do with her father. It was her house now. He had gone to the other side and he'd terrorised her for long enough and ruined her life. Fair enough. So she actually got in a Catholic priest to do blessings, and apparently it took 3 over a space of 6 months for the father's presence to fully leave the house. Wow. Now, whether or not you believe this is a true ghost story, as she was telling it to me, there was some, tears building up. There was a lot of emotion. She 100% believed this to be real. So that really swayed me over, and I thought, oh my word, isn't that quite a frightening thought? You know, a lot of ghost stories, we seem to retell the spooky or scary ones rather than the nice ghost stories, but there's a lot of those out there, folks. But to think of something like that could be horrible in your life to come back like that, it's unpleasant, isn't it?
Submission to Spooky Scary Storytime is called Speed Demons, and it was submitted by someone named Megan, who says she is a former 911 dispatcher. And this story is unsettling in itself, but I feel like there's another story sitting in my inbox that may be related to this one. If you're new here, this is Spooky Scary Storytime, the series of allegedly true listener-submitted stories about the creepiest or most unsettling things that people have ever experienced, the things that still give people nightmares. And anytime I receive multiple emails about the same subject from different people, my curiosity is piqued. Normally, I like to share stories in my own words, but because this email is so similar to another story I received, I'm going to read you it exactly how she sent it and let you decide. This story was actually submitted last July of 2025, so that just goes to show you that I am a little bit backed up on my emails. So if you have submitted a story, don't fret, I'll get to it eventually. Okay, Megan's subject says Speed Demons, and it says, former 911 dispatcher here. I worked in a very large police dispatch center in the early 2000s that fielded all cellular 911 phone calls before police departments had the technology to detect and answer cellular calls occurring within their city limits. We covered 7 very large counties that ranged from metropolitan to desolation wilderness. All that to say, it was never a dull shift, and something was always happening, whether a high-speed chase through the city or lost hikers in the snowy mountains. She goes on. One night, working the graveyard shift, several of my coworkers and I received multiple 911 calls within just minutes of each other, all reporting the same thing happening on several different freeways 20 miles apart. Callers all reported something white running impossibly fast across all lanes of the freeway and then jumping over the 15 to 20 foot sound walls in a single bound. This occurred in several locations many miles apart within just minutes of each other. One caller realized how it sounded as he was saying it and said, "Well, I don't know why I'm calling exactly. I don't know what you could possibly do about it because whatever it was wasn't human." Pretty creepy in itself, right? But imagine my surprise when I come across this email, which I found because I searched my inbox for first responder stories, which somebody had requested. This man requested that I don't use his name because he says that he is a deputy now. But he says, I've never told anyone outside of my immediate family because I'm a deputy now, and I like keeping my reputation intact. But after hearing a story that reminded me of something I experienced, I figured maybe it's finally worth sharing. And I don't know which story he's referencing. But he says this happened in East Tennessee, and I'm not sure where that first story took place. But he says, just outside the edge of the Cherokee National Forest, back when I was in my early 20s. I was working nights at a truck stop off the interstate while going to school. Graveyard shifts were usually quiet. It was just truckers and the occasional family road tripping too late, and state troopers stopping in for coffee. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the CB radio behind the counter started crackling with truckers talking over each other. At first, I couldn't make out much, besides people cursing and asking if anyone else had seen it. One driver came in about 10 minutes later looking genuinely shaken. His face had gone pale enough that I asked if he wanted me to call someone. He just kept staring out the front windows toward the interstate. He finally said something crossed all 4 lanes without slowing down. I figured he'd almost hit a deer. He shook his head, and he said, "No, deer don't move like this." He described something pale and glowing under his headlights, not because it reflected light. He said it looked all white on its own. It wasn't crawling or sprinting like an animal. It moved in long, fluid bursts, almost like every stride covered 30 or 40 feet. Before it reached the shoulder, it vaulted the concrete sound barrier in one motion. While he was telling me this, another trucker pulled in. By the end of the next half hour, I counted 6 different drivers who came inside separately. None of them knew each other, none of them had arrived together, but every single one described the same thing. The most bothersome part wasn't that their descriptions matched, but it was where they'd seen it. One had been nearly 30 miles east. Another said he'd seen it farther south on an entirely different stretch of interstate. One swore it crossed directly in front of his rig less than 10 minutes before another driver claimed he'd watched it disappear into the woods 40 miles away. Even driving 70 miles an hour, there was no way anything could have covered that distance in that amount of time. The state trooper who was drinking coffee in the corner quietly got up and walked outside to use his radio. When he came back in, he didn't finish his coffee. He just tossed some cash on the counter and left. About an hour later, another deputy I know stopped for gas. I jokingly asked if they were chasing the interstate ghost. His expression changed immediately, and he asked who'd been talking. I told him about the truckers. He looked over his shoulder toward the dark tree line behind the station before saying something that stuck with me for almost 20 years. There have been calls coming in from 3 different counties. Then he lowered his voice. The descriptions are all identical. I honestly thought he was messing with me, but he didn't laugh back. Before he left, he told me to lock the doors after the last customer and not to go wandering outside by myself. I asked why. He said, if you hear something hit the back fence, don't look for it. Around 4:30 that morning, business finally slowed down. I was counting my drawer when something slammed into the chain link fence behind the building hard enough to rattle the entire back wall. It was one enormous impact and then complete silence. I waited a few seconds before looking through the rear security monitor, and there was nothing there. It was just the dumpsters and the woods beyond them. I almost convinced myself that it had been a truck backing into something until I noticed the fence. The top rail was bent inward. Whatever had struck it hadn't climbed over, and there was no sign of life. It had come from the outside. I never saw what made the sound, but for the next several weeks, truckers kept bringing it up whenever they stopped in overnight. They'd ask each other if anyone had seen the white runner. Most people laughed it off and thought it was an urban legend that had started somewhere, but I was there when it originated. The ones who claimed to have seen it never actually laughed. They just got quiet, and everyone described the same thing. This email was sent in January of this year. So completely different email, completely different story, could be completely different locations. I'm not sure. But anytime I get similar stories that sound like they could be related, I feel like it's best to share them together and let you all decide if you think they're related. And I don't know where the first story took place. The second one says East Tennessee, and I don't know the year of the first story or the second. Could be coincidence, could be something more. If there's any truckers or first responders who have heard of these speed demons or white runners, please weigh in. I would love to hear more and expand on this subject if possible. And if you have a spooky scary story time, whether it's related to this topic or something else entirely and something that just genuinely still leaves you unsettled, please send it in. We would love to hear it.
Grave robbers in this area used to dig up fresh bodies and sell them to a college professor. But these men in particular got greedy, and they stopped waiting for people to die and started killing them instead. In early 1800s Scotland, medical schools desperately needed bodies for anatomy lessons. The problem was, obtaining legal cadavers was extremely difficult, and that's what Burke and Hare saw as an opportunity. While other men were out body snatching from local cemeteries, William Burke and William Hare started their own venture. Both men were Irish immigrants living in Edinburgh and working odd jobs to get by. They were also renting rooms to different tenants. In 1828, one of Hare's tenants, an elderly man named Donald, passed away while still owing him money. To cover the debt that Donald owed, they sold the body to Dr. Robert Knox, an anatomy lecturer who planned on dissecting the cadaver in front of his class at the University of Edinburgh. And that's when they realized that dead people were worth money, but that waiting for someone to die was super inconvenient. So they decided to create their own supply. Between November 1827 and October 1828, Burke and Hare murdered 16 people. One of their victims escaped. Another one was recognized by students at the university, but still, they continued to get away with it. Until they murdered a woman named Marjorie. At the time, they had a couple staying with them, and they temporarily moved this couple to another boarding house so that they wouldn't be a witness in Marjorie's murder. But when the couple returned the next day, they entered the room where they left all their belongings, and they found Marjorie's body hidden underneath the bed. They immediately went to police, but by the time they got there, Marjorie's body had already been sold off to Dr. Knox. Burke and Hare were arrested, but during their interrogation, they both turned on each other. Hare was offered immunity, but in return, he had to testify against his best friend and partner in crime, Burke. So he did, and Burke was charged with murder and executed in front of a crowd of about 25,000 people. And then, ironically, his body was donated to medical science and is still on display at the University of Edinburgh today.
Here are more spooky stories that I found in my TikTok comments. Let's go! There was one time when I was little, about 5-ish. One day I woke up and felt hands running through my hair. I thought it was my mom, so I jokingly slapped it, and it was solid. I got up, turned around, and was greeted with a wall. Creeps me the F out now, more than a decade later. My sister, my aunt, and I were alone at my aunt's house. I was like 8-ish. The stairs were right across from the bathroom. I went to the bathroom, but on the way there, I saw that my aunt's dog was barking at the stairs. When I peeked out, I saw a shadow of what looked like a man wearing a hat. He stared at me for a few seconds and then left. We went upstairs and there was absolutely no one there, nor were there any windows open. I saw the man of the hat. Not the hat man. When I was 15, I was sitting for my junior certificate exams. These are Irish exams halfway through secondary school. This was in Dublin, and we heavily rely on buses as teenagers. The bus I got to school was the 63, and another bus was the 45A, and they were both at the same stop. While waiting for the 63, I was speaking to a man with a crate of Fanta and having a cigarette with him. Me and the man were getting the same bus together. The 63 came and the 45A was due 5 minutes later. I got my ticket, and on the slip it shows the bus number. The man put the Fantas in the storage part of the bus. I had a nap on the bus because it was very early, and I woke up about 15 minutes later, and I was going the complete opposite way. I pressed the button to get off, and when I asked which bus it was, the driver told me 45A, and the Fantas were also gone. This was the strangest occurrence of my life. I had to get 2 different buses to get to school and missed my first test. I kept the ticket for years. It had 63 written on it, but somehow I ended up on the 45A. Years ago, I was visiting some friends for a couple of days. The first night there, I stayed in their guest bedroom but felt so uncomfortable all night. I made some excuse to just sleep on the couch in the living room for the second night. I was sleeping on my stomach when I was woken up by the very tactile sensation of a hand wrapping around my leg and slowly moving upwards. It startled me, but I chalked it up to being a dream and turned to lay on my back. Before I'd had a chance to get sleepy again, I felt the exact same sensation of feeling 5 fingers wrapped around the front of my other leg and begin to slowly move upwards. I left my friends a note and just left for work early. I'm so curious if your friends have also felt the same thing. Not really a scary story, but a couple of years ago, me and my girlfriend were in bed sleeping. I woke up in the middle of the night around 2 to 4 a.m. like I usually do because I need to pee around that time. But anyway, I was in the bathroom and I heard my girlfriend mumbling something in her sleep, and I just suddenly felt an urge and asked her, "Babe, are you awake?" And I kid you not, she responded with, "Oh, don't you worry, she's asleep." And the weird thing is, it has never happened since. Last night, a friend messaged me that he won 300 pounds in the casino, and I told my brother. Now today, the messages are gone, and he swears he never won. When I was very young, maybe like 6, me and my family moved into a house in 2011. After about 3 to 4 years, I was about 9, and one day I woke up and the end of my bed was wet. It was weird because I wasn't wet, so I looked up at my ceiling and it was damp, so my parents went into the attic. It was empty, but there were 2 cartons of milk from 2013 as it was set to expire. But we moved into my house in 2011 and my parents never put milk up there. Who puts milk in the attic? And around a few days before that happened, I heard noises upstairs, and the people that owned the house before were very old, in their 90s. But who would put milk up there after 2 years of owning the house? To this day, I still hear noises in the attic, but no one is there. I feel like maybe you should check if you have intruders, just in case. A family friend who was 94 had died from natural causes, and my mom and I went to her flat to collect the items she wanted with her in her coffin. We found most of them, but one thing we couldn't find was her deceased husband's hat from when he was in the army. I wanted to try something, so I said out loud, "Patricia, if you're here, can you help us find the hat?" And I kid you not, the little cabinet beside where she used to sit immediately fell open. It had never done so in all the times I had visited. And what was inside? The hat. I said thank you to Patricia, and she got to be buried with her husband's hat. As always, I love these stories, and the comments just seem to get creepier, so keep those stories coming. Okay, bye!
Has ever seen that movie called I've seen a lot of scary things out in the woods, but I don't think I've ever seen anything that sounds as terrifying as the story I'm about to tell you. So grab your favorite hoodie or your favorite cozy blanket and settle in for episode 2 of Sparrow After Dark. It's another spooky Appalachian story, and this one comes from one of our followers named Katie. Hi Sparrow, my sister and I are huge fans of yours, and we've been following you since the beginning of the spring. Well, I want to tell you a story that happened to me and my sister when we were at summer camp back in 2008. We were just teenagers at the time, and I remember being so excited when the school bus pulled up to the summer camp and we were ready to unload all of our clothes. The first thing we did was meet up with our camp counselor, and she walked us right over to cabin A, is what we were sleeping in. I remember being so excited, putting our suitcases and luggage down at the cabin, and her saying immediately, as she always would, "Hey, when it gets dark out, do you want to go for a spook walk?" If you guys know me, you know I love my spook walks. As always, I said yes immediately, and we put our stuff down and we waited for the sun to go down for us to grab our flashlights and go for a walk. I remember it being really humid and the fog was rising off all of the ponds around us, which made it even more spooky. Campground rules was we had to be back at the cabin by 10 p.m., so I remember we both tried to walk as far and as fast as we could. I remember as we were walking, you could hear footsteps around us, the crunching of the leaves, and the sounds of the crickets singing in the trees. We didn't really get spooked spooked yet, not until we started hearing the sounds of what sounded like scraping on the side of trees. And we didn't think anything of it. We kind of thought that maybe it was just deer or maybe black bears sharpening their claws. Now, of course, the thought of black bear being close to us is scary, but when you're in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a lot more scary things than black bear. It wasn't until we kept walking and then all of a sudden everything just went dead silent. So I asked my sister to take out her flashlight and start shining it off into the woods. As she's shining the flashlight into the woods, you couldn't really see or hear anything because, like I said, it went dead silent. That was until we stood there for a moment in the darkness because we could hear something in the distance all of a sudden make a noise that was kind of like shh. And at first, we thought it was other kids from the camp messing with us, so I told her to continue to shine the light into the dark. About a few seconds after continuing to shine the lights, you could hear what sounded like the sound of scratches on the trees, except the weird thing was it started far away, and then all of a sudden, it started getting closer to us. That was when I tapped her on the shoulder, and I said, "Hey, I don't feel safe anymore. I think we should start walking back towards our cabin." She agreed to do so, so she turned the light around and started to face it towards the track where we were supposed to walk back towards our cabin. As we were walking, we noticed that it's very dark out, and then we still couldn't hear anything because all of the animals and the bugs were still silent. Right when I was about to tap her on the back to say, "Hey, I'm starting to get spooked, let's walk faster," that is when I heard the sound of something behind us go, shh. Both of us screamed so loud and we panicked so hard that we ran all the way back to our cabin. We flew inside to our cabin and we shut and locked all of the doors. The moment that we got a chance, we ran right to the closest window and we started peeking out the blinds. At first we couldn't see anything except for the moonlight shining on all the trees, and that was until she looked at me and said, Look over there." I peeked my head out as far as those blinds as far as I could, and that's when I saw a shadowy figure dart from one tree behind another. We both got so scared that we jumped about a foot or so away from this window. As we step back in a form of panic, we look at each other and we start giggling a little bit because we weren't sure if what we were seeing was real. It was the moment we decided to put on our PJs, and as we were getting changed, you can hear what sounds like scratching on the screen of our window. Her being scared and continuing to get dressed, I walked over to the window, and that is when I decided to peek out through the blinds. This was the moment that I wish I've never done that, because this is when I had a moment that changed my life forever. I peeked out the windows of these blinds, and it was only about 2 feet from the window was when I saw a smile that looked like from ear to ear with very sharp teeth just spread. I screamed as loud as I could as I jumped back from this window. I screamed so loud that I dropped the flashlight and my sister started screaming with me. And then not only a few minutes later was when our camp counselor came barging through our door. Our counselor started yelling at us, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And that's when I looked at her and I tried to explain to her what had happened. But of course, she didn't believe us. She tried to reassure us that everything we heard and saw was just in our heads and tried to tell us to go back to sleep. She walked out the door, and me and my sister didn't get an inch of sleep that night. All I can tell you is for the rest of the camp week that we were there, neither of us went on a walk in the middle of the night for the rest of the time. But I can tell you that from time to time, I do have nightmares, and in my nightmares, I do see somebody smiling. And that is actually where she stops the story, and I don't know about you guys, but I've seen a lot of things in the middle of the night in the dark that I can't tell plays tricks on me or not. Absolutely love stories that can't be explained. And if you guys have any other stories, they do not have to be from the Appalachian Mountains. They can be about anything. Please email them to the email above or the email I'm going to put down at the bottom. And thank you guys so much for enjoying my second episode of Sparrow After Dark.
You have to understand that when you go into the Appalachian Mountains, you are entering into another realm. And there is a set of unspoken rules that you must follow. Rule number 1, if you hear something calling your name, right, you didn't. There is nothing there. And you should not respond. Do not say hello. Do not say, who is it? Just run away. Because something is trying to gain permission. And by you acknowledging it, you are allowing it to come after you. If you hear screams in the mountains, right, you didn't. And do not go towards the direction of the screams to try and help. Because once again, something is trying to lure you. If you see people, you don't. If you hear crying, you're not hearing it. Do not respond to this at all because you are giving permission to whatever is in those woods to come after you. Now, if you are to go camping in the Appalachian Mountains, right, you have to remember, at night, you must keep a fire going at all times. And it's not for warmth, it's not for cooking, it's to keep you safe. And if you are going to camp in a tent. Make sure when you go into that tent, it is sealed up. There are no holes, there are no cracks. And if you hear any kind of screaming, yelling, or anyone calling your name, do not respond. Do not go to sleep. And if something wakes you up, stay up, stay alert, and once again, do not respond. Now, it's very important when you are walking through the Appalachian Mountains, if you come across a deer carcass, do not touch it, do not stare at it, walk away, ignore it, because this is something, once again, trying to lure you into the woods. Now, if it comes to the point that something is chasing you and it gets you and there is no escape, fight. Fight as hard as you can, whether it's a person, an animal. If it's something else, though, and you know what I'm talking about, well, you just let it get you, right? Because at that point, there's nothing you can do. And there's an old saying, you go into the Appalachian Mountains with 2 bullets, right? You fire the first one at something that isn't a person, that isn't an animal. And if it doesn't run away, you know what to do with the second one.
There was a kid that went missing in my neighborhood growing up, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is what we found out later. So when I was growing up, there was a boy, his name was Ethan, and he lived 3 houses down from me. He was always on his BMX bike riding around, and he was calmly like outside until the streetlights came on. I don't know how often his parents really saw him. He was always just outside. He was 11 years old at the time, and on one Friday afternoon, he actually went missing. They did find his bike. It was behind a baseball field that I would say was probably like half a mile from my house. I remember there was a lot of search parties, and it went on for quite a while. Like, neighbors would volunteer, the police officers searched for a while. We even had like helicopters at one point looking for Ethan. Nobody ever found like any trace of him. It's really, really sad, but people did stop talking about it and they stopped searching for it. The family actually eventually moved away, which I don't blame them. They probably just had too many memories there. Fast forward 15 years later, I went back home to help my parents clean out their garage for them as they were like moving out. So I had lived away from home for like 3 years at the time, and I went back. One of those days I decided just to go walk the town like one last time, right? Because I didn't have any need to come back to it. And I went over to the baseball field and I was just, you know, looking at everything, taking it all in. It was a lot smaller than I remember it being. It was definitely old and withering away, I guess you could say. Behind the field was an old maintenance building. It had been locked up for as long as I can remember. But this time when I walked over to it, the door was actually hanging open. And that was weird because it was always locked, but I figured that the city was probably just tearing it down. It was probably about time. I got nosy, I went in. It was just old lawnmowers, sprinklers, shelves with like lots of dust, right? I was stepping out to leave and I noticed that there were actually fresh footprints going into it, and they were not my footprints, they were somebody else's footprints. Like somebody had been in there recently, I'm sure, just to tear it down. And so I was looking at the floor and I started to notice that there was one square of concrete that looked different than the rest. As I looked closer, I noticed that it had like a very old, rusty like ring on it. And if you gave it a little pull, it actually lifted, and I realized this wasn't concrete at all. You lift it up enough and you see that it's actually a wooden hatch, and it had like the thinnest layer of concrete on it. After you lifted it up, there was a staircase that actually led underground. And I'll never forget the smell. The smell was very damp, like it had been closed for a minute, it seems like. And I went down the first step, obviously so scary. I was nosy. I went down the first step, second step, I had my flashlight on, and then I caught something on the wall. And it looked like marks, it was like marks that you see in a movie of people like counting days, like of how long they've been trapped there. I got freaked out. I left and I called the police. Police came, they searched the tunnel that night. The next day, actually, on the news, they talked about how there was evidence that this tunnel has been used in the past. And it didn't say like what kind of evidence, but it also didn't say anything to do with Ethan. But that's not the weirdest part. Get this, a few weeks later, I actually bumped into one of the retired officers that worked on missing cases decades earlier, and I asked him if he knew about the tunnel or if he found out like what the tunnel was for, and he said, no, we knew about it back in the day. I'm like, you knew it was like a room, like it had a staircase? And he's like, yes, we did know that it was a room and potential things could have been happening under there. However, when we did go and search it for missing person cases, it was always empty. I asked him if he thought that somebody ever used it like later on after it was hidden, and he asked me a question back. He said, was there a light bulb on the string coming down from the ceiling? And I said yes, and he just kind of stared at me, and he was like, that's a little weird because the electricity actually stopped working 2 years before Ethan even went missing. So I'm not sure who's replacing that light bulb all these years.
In 1984, a 16-year-old boy tragically lost his life in a car accident. When the detective later reviewed photos taken at the scene, something chilling stood out. What appeared to be the boy's spirit, his face frozen in a silent scream, lingering at the very spot where he passed away. My parents' house has a ghost. There's an ongoing pattern of them hearing random footsteps walking towards their master bathroom. Just a few weeks ago, we were all sitting downstairs. Nobody else was in the house, and all of a sudden, we started hearing the footsteps again. In that same moment, my mom got a notification on her camera app. The camera takes photos when there's motion, and we finally caught this. Earlier in the year, I had a car accident. My partner and I were in the car, and thankfully, everyone was okay. We were out of the car and on the side of the road when I decided to take some photos of the accident. My hands were very shaky because of the shock from the accident, so a lot of the pictures that I took came out blurry. Only this one came out clear. There was nobody nearby when I took the photo, but standing by the driver's side door, there appears to be a man. My accident also happened right near a cemetery.
On a cold winter night in the year 1631, a miller named James Graham was working alone in his mill in the northern English village of Great Lumley. It was late, just around midnight. Perhaps it was merely the darkness or the lateness of the hour, but the miller suddenly found himself unaccountably uneasy. Then the temperature seemed to drop. Taking that as his cue, Graham abruptly abandoned his work and descended the stairs to depart for the night. On the ground floor, he got a nasty shock of fright to see a young woman standing before him. The woman looked to be in her early 20s. She was disheveled, clearly in distress. Her clothes were torn, and her hair hung loose and wet, though it was not raining. Before he could gather his wits, the woman spoke. "I am Anne Walker." All at once, Graham recognized the woman. Anne Walker, the pretty young niece of a local landowner who had come to Great Lumley the year before to keep house for her uncle. But Anne had not been seen in the village for weeks, not since she had been sent away to stay with another relative in a nearby town. Alarmed, the miller asked what had happened to her. "I have been murdered," Anne replied. It was then that Graham noticed her injuries. Her hair was not wet with rain, but with blood, emerging out of 5 distinct wounds to her head. Suddenly realizing that this was no living woman but an apparition, the affrighted and amazed miller quickly crossed himself as Anne continued to tell him, in specific and unambiguous detail, why, how, and by whose hand she had come to her wretched end, as well as exactly where her body was hidden. She begged Graham to come forward and tell the authorities what had happened to her, warning him that she would continue to haunt him if he did not. Then she disappeared, leaving the miller trembling in terror. Preserved in multiple contemporary and near-contemporary accounts, the Anne Walker case is a truly extraordinary piece of 17th century ghost lore. In 1631, the small village of Great Lumley in County Durham in the north of England had a population of about a few hundred people. One of the more prosperous figures in the village was a man named John Walker, a widowed yeoman of good estate. After some years of living alone in his substantial house, Walker had taken in his orphaned niece, an attractive young woman in her early 20s who had come to serve as her uncle's housekeeper. This domestic situation was, by contemporary and modern readings alike, deeply vulnerable. A young woman living alone with an older male relative, dependent on him for food, shelter, and social protection, in a period and a region where the moral authority of household patriarchs was all but absolute. Needless to say, the arrangement raised eyebrows in the village. There had been rumors of improper relations between uncle and niece, gossip that Anne was now pregnant, that Walker was the father. These rumors provoked considerable concern and suspicion amongst the community, so much so that Walker had felt the need to send his niece to stay with an aunt in a nearby town. Walker claimed it was to recover from an illness. The rest of Great Lumley whispered it was to give birth to a child in the privacy of her aunt's house. As far as the village knew, Anne remained there still, but the spirit who had come to Graham in his mill was now suggesting otherwise. In fact, the alleged apparition had made some very specific and very damning accusations. In statements Graham would later repeat in court, the spirit had told him, quote, "I am Anne Walker, who lived with your neighbor, John Walker. He promised to look after me. He said he would send me to a place where I would be cared for, and afterwards I could return as his housekeeper. But I was betrayed. He told me to go with a Mr. Mark Sharp, who slew me on a moor." And after naming the specific location, she had offered additional details. "He slew me with a collier's pick, threw my body into a coal pit, and hid the pick under the bank, and his shoes and stockings, which were covered in blood, he left in a stream." Now, if you're anything like me, you might be wondering, where does James Graham fit into all this? And it's a good question, because from the sources we have, he actually doesn't seem to fit into this really at all. By all accounts, Graham had little to no investment in the Anne Walker situation, beyond a general interest one would naturally expect from neighbors in a small rural community. He lived a few miles away from John Walker and knew him only slightly. There was no social or economic connection between the men or their households. There's no evidence in any of the surviving accounts that Graham had ever even met Anne Walker in life. He likely knew her by sight, but he almost certainly did not know her personally. So, why James Graham? The apparition, when it came, could presumably have gone to anyone. The parish priest, whose formal authority could have been leveraged to open an investigation. The local magistrate, who could have acted immediately. Any number of villagers with better standing and better connections than that possessed by a rural miller. According to the accounts, Graham himself was equally as baffled by the strange choice. Described as a practical, no-nonsense man who would not court even an ignorant fear of the supernatural, Graham initially resisted coming forward with the story, which is understandable. Not only did he fear ridicule from the village for what he himself even seemed to consider a story too absurd to be believed, there were other potential consequences beyond humiliation. Even if the magistrate was inclined to believe this tall tale, the social consequences of making such an accusation against a man of John Walker's standing were potentially disastrous. So, what changed his mind? Well, apparently it was Anne's dogged haunting. The apparition returned to hound Graham several more times, demanding that he do what she had asked. The intensity of the visitations increased. Graham became visibly disturbed. His wife, his friends, and neighbors noticed that something was wrong with him. Eventually, he broke. He went to the magistrate and revealed the whole story, giving all the details he had been told, including the specific location of Anne's body. A search was immediately mounted. The coal pit was found on the moor, and there, just where Graham had said it would be, was Anne's body. Badly decomposed, but still bearing signs of the 5 head wounds Graham had seen on the apparition. A further search turned up the pickaxe, as well as bloodied stockings and a leather jerkin. Every detail the alleged apparition had given Graham was correct. Now, I want to pause here and acknowledge the question that any reasonable person has to be asking at this point. How did Graham know all this? Looking at the case coldly, there are 2 possibilities. The first is that something genuinely supernatural was going on. That an apparition of a murdered woman did actually appear in his mill and gave him detailed evidentiary information about her own death. The second is that Graham himself was implicated in some way. Either he committed the murder, or he was in some way accomplice to it, or at the very least, he learned about it through some alternate channel and used the story of the apparition as a cover to bring the crime to light without incriminating himself or someone he was trying to protect. And it's important to note that contemporary investigators did absolutely consider this last possibility. This was not a naive age credulously accepting supernatural testimony. Graham naturally fell under suspicion and was himself subjected to intense investigation. The magistrate, and later the court, thoroughly examined his relationship with the victim, with the accused, and with anyone else who might have had knowledge of the crime. And they found nothing. Literally nothing. Graham had barely any connection to John Walker and none at all to Mark Sharp. He had no motive to have participated in the murder, no financial or personal interest in the outcome. The last time Anne was seen alive, she was nowhere near Graham, but rather in the company of her uncle and Mark Sharp, a fact which Graham could not have known until it came out in the trial. As the investigation proceeded, a clearer picture of the days leading up to Anne's disappearance began to emerge. And the more information investigators uncovered, the more credible Graham's account seemed. As it turned out, Anne actually had gone to stay with an aunt, a woman named Dame Claire, who lived in nearby Chesterle Street. And during her stay, Anne had apparently made certain noteworthy statements to her aunt. She admitted that she was indeed pregnant. And though she would not name the father of her child, she assured her aunt that the man had promised to provide for both her and the baby. Shortly after her arrival, John Walker had come to visit Anne at her aunt's house. Accompanying him was Mark Sharp. a Lancashire-born collier, or coal miner, and a, quote, sworn brother of John Walker. Walker told Dame Claire that he had made arrangements to move Anne to a safer, more suitable location for her confinement. With no reason to doubt a respectable man with a good local reputation, and still less grounds to refuse the decision of her niece's closest male relative, Dame Claire allowed Anne to leave with Walker and Sharp. It was the last time anyone had seen her. The bloodied stockings and the leather jerkin that had been found near the body were definitively tied to Mark Sharp, cut to a size specifically to match his uniquely short, almost dwarfish build. The means by which they had arrived at the evidence was seriously questionable, but astonishingly, all the pieces were falling into place. The investigators ultimately concluded that Graham was telling the truth about what he had experienced, whatever the ultimate nature of that experience was. John Walker and Mark Sharp were arrested. The trial took place at the Durham Assize in August of 1632. The presiding judge was a man named Davenport. The case was heard in open court with a full jury and multiple witnesses testifying under oath. And there was something interesting that happened during the trial. Something notable and singularly strange that appears in multiple contemporary accounts. The foreman of the jury was a man named Fairhair. He testified under oath on record that during the trial, he saw the likeness of a child standing on John Walker's shoulders. And get this, another witness attending the trial with no knowledge of the foreman's claim also described seeing the shade of a child on John Walker's shoulders. The judge himself reportedly had a similar uncanny vision, though he declined to comment in detail. The accounts record that Davenport was, quote, much agitated during the trial, and it was believed that the spirit had also appeared to him, as if to supply in his mind the want of legal evidence. The trial ended, and the verdict came in. Guilty. And then Judge Davenport did something that, according to the historical record of Durham legal procedure, had never been done before or since in that jurisdiction. He passed sentence immediately after the trial concluded. That may not sound crazy, but the customary practice at the Durham Assize was to defer sentencing until the close of the entire session, after all the cases had been heard. The tradition was firmly established and universally observed. Judge Davenport broke it for this case alone. According to the surviving accounts, he was so shaken by what had transpired in his courtroom that he could not sit with the case any longer than absolutely necessary. He sentenced John Walker and Mark Sharp to death that very evening. The two were subsequently hanged, protesting their innocence to the very end. The Anne Walker case is one of the very few documented instances in English legal history in which testimony about supernatural experience was accepted as material evidence in a formal court proceeding, in a case that resulted in a conviction for murder. This is not what the early modern English legal system was supposed to do. English common law had long-standing, well-articulated principles about the kinds of evidence admissible in criminal proceedings. Ghost stories, no matter how compelling, were definitely not on the list. And yet, the Anne Walker case worked its way through the entire legal apparatus successfully, and two men were legally executed on the basis of a chain of evidence that started with a ghost. The legal system officially couldn't do this, and yet the legal system did. This actually seemed to disturb a good many people at the time. As one contemporary wrote, quote, "This case is certainly a solemn illustration of the maladministration of justice in an ancient court." And yet, he goes on to concede that, quote, "The circumstantial evidence arising from the appearance of the spirit appears very strong." This was particularly true of Sharp. Though skeptics did not like how they arrived at the evidence, they did have to admit that it was remarkable that Sharp's blood-spattered shoes and stockings were found where Graham had told them to look. Even so, the skeptically minded expressed a clear discomfort with the verdict, particularly when it came to Walker, against whom, quote, "there seemed not a shadow of evidence, except the account received from the ghost." We cannot know for sure how Graham came by the privileged information that solved a missing persons case and sentenced two men to death. What we do know is that, whether he was telling the truth or not, it took a voice from beyond the grave to bring the information to light. And this tells us something specific and important about how ghost stories functioned in 17th century English culture. Beyond merely entertainment or superstition, they were, in specific cases, a mechanism, a means of processing and disseminating information that the usual social and legal channels were ill-equipped to handle, disguised in a form that gave the community permission to act. The village knew something was wrong at John Walker's house. They had suspected the pregnancy, had noticed Anne's departure, and marked her prolonged absence with concern. What they lacked was a form of testimony that could translate their private, collective fear into public, actionable evidence. The ghost provided that form. Maybe Anne Walker's apparition was actually a true supernatural intervention. Or maybe it was a specific folkloric mechanism for which a community reached, whether consciously or unconsciously, to say something it could not say directly. Either way, the effect was the same. A wound that a community could not process on its own found a way to speak for itself. Anne Walker might have been one of the tens of thousands of women who disappeared into the archives of early modern English rural violence, never to be recovered. A name in a parish register, possibly not even that. A vague memory in a village, faded within a generation. Instead, 400 years later, we know Anne's name. We cannot know the true nature of what James Graham experienced in his mill that winter night, or whether he experienced anything at all. But the result was that Anne Walker got the one thing that the world would have otherwise denied her. She got to be heard, to ensure that her story did not go to the grave with her.
The experience that my mom and I had was terrifying. I still get goosebumps when I consider the possibility that what we saw was actually real. This is a story that I came across that happened to a woman named Sky and her mother in May 2017 in York County, Pennsylvania, which is like an hour away from where I live. There were also other occurrences in 2010, and we're going to get into it. Sky says that she has since moved away from York, but they're planning on moving back to Pennsylvania, and that led her to research humanoids and cryptids and sightings in the area. She came across information about what's called the Conwego Phantom, which I've never heard before. Let me know if you guys have heard of it. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. When she saw the pictures alone, it made her stomach drop. And then she was reading the description, including reports of an almost humanoid crying sound. And she was shocked. She said, it is difficult to pinpoint the exact date when this all began, but she believes that this happened during the summer of 2010. There were two separate incidences that neither of them originally thought were connected. Sky says they were living in Mount Wolf at the time, and the woods were directly behind the house. She said it wasn't unusual to hear foxes, owls, or other animals making noise at night. But one evening, her mom called her outside to listen to something. She describes it as a sad, lonely, wailing sound. Sky says they spent a great deal of time researching animals that might have produced it, but they could never find a satisfactory explanation. She said the sound would fade in and out before eventually just drifting away. She goes, I had not given the sound much thought afterward because the visual encounter became the strongest memory from that period. She said it was only after she read descriptions of the Conwego Phantom that she realizes these two incidences suddenly seemed connected. Okay, so a short time later, her and her mom were returning home after running errands. And as they were nearing the fields, they would slow the vehicle down because they often like to watch the deer run along the horizon. It was nighttime, and Sky was sitting in the passenger seat and trying to see through her mother's side of the vehicle when she noticed a black form near the back window. She says, I do not remember exactly what I said or did to make my mom look behind us, but she turned and she saw it too. And then she immediately faced forward. She slammed on the gas and she drove away. And she would not even discuss what she had seen until they were safely home and inside the house. So Sky's mom said that when she turned to look at the figure, it stood up. Wing-like appendages then spread outward from its back. Jeepers creepers much? They both agreed this thing was absolutely massive and would estimate that it stood approximately 9 to 10 feet tall. Sky says, I don't remember seeing red eyes or any other facial details. Everything happened very quickly. Sky is usually more easily frightened by paranormal activity, while her mom tends to be more curious. However, whatever this thing was, absolutely terrified her mother. I mean, obviously. Sky also says that her mom would later return to investigate the location, which why? But anyway, Sky was too frightened to go with her. She did not want to return alone. So Sky says that the following day, they returned to the area during daylight. And they looked for any other object that might have resembled the figure that they had seen. Like they're looking at the trees, the mailboxes, they're looking for signs, anything that they might have confused, but they found nothing. They said until they discovered those phantom reports, they would jokingly refer to this as a Mothman experience. She said she had no idea that people reported a creature like the Conwego Phantom. And she has told this story many times to people, but does not think that they fully understand what happened. To them, it probably sounds like a spooky ghost story, but she goes, I have desperately wanted an explanation. And after finding the research, she wondered whether or not she had fully discovered one of those phantoms. She also said there was a similar family encounter when her grandmother said that she had a similar experience while living in Edgewood, Maryland. She describes a massive black winged figure lingering near her vehicle. Her description was remarkably similar to what her and her mother had seen, and her grandmother believed that the figure might have been a fallen angel. She says the entire situation has been surreal. She said she'd never believed that she would ever find any possible answers concerning what they encountered, and the memory has remained with her ever since. She said, I'm still unsure whether discovering these other reports has eased my mind or frightened me even more. I'm gonna go with frightened me even more. So here's a new cryptid for you. Or are we thinking this is the Mothman? Have you ever heard of the Phantom though? I need to brush up on my cryptids more, apparently. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you've got a creepy cryptid story of your own, please share it. If you're interested in Creepy Storytime merch, you know what to do. Click that LINK in the bio. And if you're new here, please follow for more Creepy Storytime.
Tonight we're going to be telling the story of the journal that was found of biologist Aaron Mercer. To this day, Aaron Mercer's body has never been found. No trace of his belongings has ever been found except for his tent and journal. So inside this tent, about 40 years ago, they found a journal with a recorder of Aaron Mercer, the biologist that was hired by Yellowstone National Park to go deep into the park and study the deer. If you guys did not know this, Yellowstone Park routinely conducts surveys on their deer and their other animals to see if they need to cull the herd when there's sickness or disease. Aaron Mercer had been called out there for exactly this. He was supposed to go deep into the park and camp there for about a week and study the deer populations because there had been report after report of strange deer sightings and weird behavior going on amongst the herds of deer of Yellowstone. All they found was the journal and recorder, so tonight we're going to be doing a dramatized version of those findings. This is Dr. Aaron Mercer. I made it here on my first night pretty late. I'm getting set up at the ranger cabin about 15 miles off the nearest trailhead where the strange sightings have came in. This is probably going to be a pretty routine case. If it's cold out, there's a lot of snow on the ground, there's an overpopulation of deer, and they're just malnourished. They're looking skinny and gangly. The reports are saying that it looks like their skin is falling off of them, and I can see that. When they get real skinny, their hair kind of falls off in patches, so we're going to see what we can find out here. Shh, shh, shh. Look, it's my first night, and one already came right outside of the cabin. Look at this. It's really quite beautiful out here. I can see all the stars. You can see the Milky Way. It's just now got that little glow in the distance there. You can see the first stars popping out. It's a really beautiful night. It's day 2, and I just found a really beautiful herd of deer out here. They look completely fine. It doesn't look like anything's wrong with them. I'm going to turn my light on, and hopefully I don't scare them. You guys can take a peek at them. It's night of day 2, and I just had the craziest thing happen. This buck, he just keeps walking up to me. And what's weird is it doesn't look like he's looking towards me. It really feels like he's looking at me, like there's some kind of intelligence. I've moved my position multiple times, and he just keeps walking towards me. So I'm starting to see the strange phenomenon. Some of the deer are looking pretty unusual. Here's a deer that's almost solid black. He seems to be a spike, and once again, just like the others, he's not afraid. It's almost like he's wanting some help. It's that same big buck again. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the tent for tonight. Something just doesn't feel right. So I'm inside the ranger cabin for tonight, and that's probably where I'm going to stay. I've never seen anything like this. Those deer just didn't seem shy. I mean, they keep circling the cabin. I've heard them walking around outside all night. I've heard them rubbing their antlers on the side of the walls. I've been at this for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. I haven't seen any of the phenomenon where they're talking about the skin looks to be falling off of them. I haven't seen them walk strange or behave oddly, besides the fact that they're just having no fear of humans. They're eating what they're supposed to eat, they're grazing, they're walking, they run when they think they see a predator, but they don't associate humans as predator. And To be this far out in the park and this isolated, this is not normal. I'm going to peek outside the window and see if they're still out there. It's been a few hours since I've heard anything. There he is. It's the same one as before. He's like a shadow. It's that same big buck. It's just before daybreak. He's been out there all night. He's watching me more than I'm watching him, and he's not blinking. He's just observing. He's just staring. There he is. Every few minutes he's back. It might be a slightly different spot, but he's always there. I don't know how to describe this, but it's almost like he's stalking me. Around 4 a.m., I moved to Ranger Station 2 to the next cabin. It's about a 1.5 mile walk I did in the middle of the night in Yellowstone. No one would ever advise that. But I just got so creeped out, and yet here he is. Just watching. It's the end of day 4. I've called for help to come out here. I've got a walkie-talkie, and I radioed the ranger stations for them to come out here and pick me up. I'm afraid to leave. I've resigned myself to stay inside this cabin until it's over. Today, I saw something I can't explain. I saw that buck walk behind a tree. I've been obsessed with watching him. He walked behind the tree, but he never came out at the other side. It was like he walked through a portal. Mathematically, it doesn't make sense. It wasn't that big of a tree. He never came out the other side. At least not for about 5 minutes. And then what peered at me from behind the tree, it peeked at me. Like some kind of evil child playing peekaboo, it peeked at me. I saw one broken horn coming out of what looked like a human head as it peeked around this corner. And it smiled. It might sound crazy, but right before I turned this video on, I felt like I could hear it in my head. It was talking to me. But not like how I talk, and I wasn't hearing it with my ears. It was like I was feeling it with my body. And it said the craziest thing. It said that it wants me to be a part of the herd, to come live here with them. You hear that? You hear that? That wasn't the same as the others. I looked out the window, and its skin was falling off and its legs bent the wrong direction. It wasn't walking on all fours anymore. It was walking on 2 legs. This is some kind of abomination. This isn't from our earth. God wouldn't let anything like that exist. I can see him. He's just standing there. He won't stop looking at me. Look at him. What do you want? What do you want? Guys, I'm so happy. I haven't slept in a couple days and I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the park and I'm going to be free. This is where I was supposed to be the whole time. I don't know why I fought it for so long. Some legends say that the Wendigo took them. Some say that they were SWs, the word I'm not going to say out here, since I live on an Indian reservation. Other people say it was something called the knot deer, and others say he was simply crazy. The story is for you to decide, since we do not have the answers. I personally like to think he's out there living with the herd, being free. This story was fake. I made it up, so now you can go to sleep peacefully. Hey, we're in the daylight. It's not so scary in here. Go follow our podcast. It's called Matt from Nomads on Spotify and Apple Podcast. If you really like this story and you're already on the podcast and you couldn't see the visuals, go to Facebook and TikTok. It's called Nomads Animal Encounter, and the YouTube is Nomads Animal Reserve. See you next time.
The stories of King Henry VIII and his wives have really fascinated me for years, but the ghost of Anne Boleyn has really caught me in a chokehold lately. Many of you have probably heard the story of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, but in case you haven't, King Henry VIII was a basically a tyrant in the 1500s, I believe. And he did not treat his wives very kindly, I guess you could say. And Anne Boleyn was his second wife. He wanted to marry somebody else, and so he accused her of having an affair with her brother. I might be getting that wrong, but either way, she was beheaded unjustly. While we do have a couple of pictures of her, no one knows for sure if it's actually her or if this is accurate, like an accurate portrayal of her, because after she was beheaded, King Henry VIII basically destroyed any remnants of her. Overall, it's a really sad story, and to think that she is still haunting the halls of the places she had been in her lifetime is really sad, considering that she was so poorly treated by her husband. Now, the places that she has been seen in the other realm, I guess you could say, is mostly in the Tower of London. Many people have claimed to see her either headless, so walking through the halls, or leading a group of knights, probably marching to her block. Other people have claimed to see her near Blickling Hall. I hope I said that one right. But many people have claimed to see a coach with a headless driver bring her ghost to the hall every May on the anniversary of her passing. Others have claimed to see her near Hever Castle, and this is where she grew up, and many people have claimed to see her spirit walking around. And it's just really sad to think that this poor woman is restless even in death. But what happened to Anne Boleyn and all of her husband's other wives is really a tragic story, and if you ever want to get into really sad or tragic history, I really recommend looking into King Henry VIII and how he treated his wives. It is absolutely horrible. But what are your thoughts? Do you think Anne Boleyn still haunts the halls, or is it all just our imagination? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and follow for more spooky things.
There was a guest suite in this woman's house, but she wasn't aware that the guest was still there. Welcome back to another episode of Creepy Corner with Ken. Like always, if you guys have any stories that you want me to share on here, you can send it to the email that's in my bio, but let's go ahead and get into this story because it is one of the weirdest, creepiest stories I have found on Reddit. Definitely one of the most fascinating stories, so let's get into it. This girl writes that she was wanting to move. She had spent years in apartments and just people everywhere around her, and that she felt like being on the outskirts of town would be really good for her. And she had come across this beautiful, stunning Victorian house that she could not pass up. Said that it needed some work, but that overall it was super great. She said that the people that had lived in it previously had kind of rushed out of the place, and when she asked her realtor why it was, she did make eye contact with her and really didn't answer the question. Red flag number one. However, she signed anyway. She says that she thought of herself as a rational person, or at least she did, until she discovered the guest suite. As she's moving in, she realizes that there's this strange guest suite on the 3rd floor, kind of hidden, and it wasn't built in on the floor plan. When she looked at the floor plans, it was labeled as a storage room, not a guest suite. And that when she looked closer, she realized that there were 3 deadbolts on this door. Then she realized that there was a yellow note taped underneath them. She said that the handwriting was super jagged, it was uneven, and it looked almost as if someone had wrote it in a hurry. The note wrote, "Keep doors locked between 3 and 4 a.m. Do not listen, do not open." And she said she immediately calls her real estate agent. "Yeah, hi, we're gonna have to put this house up for sale. I know I just bought it, yeah. I'm not living here." The real estate agent said that he's never seen that hallway, and when she sent pictures of it, he stopped responding to her. She ends up trying to open the door, but not at night because she says she's not an idiot. "I'm not opening that door any time of the day." When she opened it, she said that there was really nothing in this room. There was no windows, there was a bed, and there was a chair, and the wallpaper was these tiny blue flowers. Nothing else. No hidden person, no animals, no creepy staircase. However, the air inside this room was so cold that she could see her breath when she was breathing. Because she closes the door, locks all 3 deadbolts, and that should have been the end of the story. However, the next morning she realized that one of the deadbolts was halfway open. But to make her feel better, she said that she just assumed that she hadn't closed one of them properly. However, the morning after that, the middle deadbolt had been opened several centimeters this time. And that on the 3rd night, she decided to put red duct tape between each one so that if it had opened, it would break it. When she woke up the next day, she went and checked, and each duct tape had been torn. Yeah, I'm not staying there. I don't know why she's still sleeping there. And alone, mind you. It says that after this, she bought a motion sensor camera and she aimed it right at the door. That way she could see what was happening. It said that the recording began at 2:57 in the morning and that nothing was happening. However, exactly at 3 a.m., the image was all distorted. At 3:14, that is when she starts to see slowly the deadbolts opening. The way I would have ran so fast out my front door, never looked back. Then at 3:17, it picked up this humming sound. She recognized the melody immediately. The humming was this lullaby that her grandma would always sing to her when she was a kid, but her grandma died 12 years ago. Then she noticed that the camera stopped recording the second something stood in front of the camera. She said that the camera just went completely black, but that the humming continued for another 43 minutes. Now here's where things get really interesting. She finally decides that she's gonna get the heck out of there and go sleep at a hotel until she can figure out what to do with this house. But when she opened her front door, that's when she noticed that she's standing in front of the hallway on the 3rd floor. She says that she just must be super paranoid and going crazy, but she slams the door shut and is gonna go out the back door. When she opens the back door, she's right back at the 3rd floor hallway. Every exterior door led her to that guest suite. I think I would have just simply passed away, to be honest. I think I would have had a mental breakdown and just gave up on living. She said she tried throwing chairs at windows, but that they would not break. They would just immediately bounce right back off. She said that she checked her phone and her phone still had signal, so she's trying to call people, but every time she'll call, it's just this same weird recording. And the recording was just her grandmother humming. So now she's in the kitchen. It's 2:58 in the morning. She drags the dining table behind the kitchen door and puts 2 chairs under the handle so it couldn't move, and has a knife in hand. She also has the key to the guest suite in her pocket. However, she doesn't remember putting them there. Now, at 2:59, she's starting to hear the floor creak, and not just normal creaking, footsteps, slow and deliberate. And right above her, she can hear these footsteps moving. The humming began again, and then all of a sudden she hears her grandma's voice, and her grandma says, "It's cold in here, dear." But now she's just closing her ears, trying to ignore it. No matter what, she can still hear her grandma clear as day. And the next thing her grandma said was, "Come on, you know the song, hum with me." That is when she can hear loudly each deadbolt unlocking one at a time. But she realizes she's not hearing the deadbolts unlock from above her, but behind her. Now the guest suite was suddenly behind her with 2 out of the 3 deadbolts unlocked. She said that she's just staring at that door with the key in her hand. But that's when she hears 3 soft knocks on the door that she had barricaded in the kitchen. And she hears her grandma say from the hallway, "Please don't go in there." However, at that exact moment, a voice came from the guest suite and it said, "Please, you have to let me out before it reaches you." She said at this point she doesn't know who to believe. And that's when she notices that on the note that she originally got, that there was a second note there that she hadn't seen before. The handwriting is super neat and says, "The room is not where we keep it. The room is where we hide from it." I would have went into cardiac arrest. It then said, "Once you enter, please lock all 3 deadbolts. Whatever speaks from the hallway will sound like someone you love. That's how they get you." She said immediately in that moment, the frame at the kitchen door that she had barricaded just started to shake. The table had slid across the room. So she immediately grabs the guest suite key, unlocks it, and goes in. But this time the room looks different. It's not empty like it was before. There are photographs all over this room. And it looked like all previous owners. There were family pictures everywhere, and in each photo there was a person scratched out of them. That's when she notices that there's actually a picture of her sleeping in her bedroom. On the back of this picture, in her grandma's handwriting, says, "You were always expected." And the thing in the hallway that sounded like her grandma is just screaming at the top of their lungs. She says that she shuts the guest suite door and is starting to lock the deadbolt. She gets the first one, the second one, but when she goes to lock the third one, something is physically stopping it from locking. Then she realizes it's 3:07, the humming has stopped, and that's when she notices that something under the bed is breathing, and she hears her own voice in the darkness say, "Don't worry, there's always room for one more." That is absolutely terrifying, because I don't even know how to process that. Was it her grandma out there trying to save her from going in there? Or was the thing in there trying to trick her? Like, I have so many questions. That's absolutely terrifying. And she didn't say how it ended, so we're left on a cliffhanger today. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. I thought it was absolutely fascinating and terrifying, but y'all make smart choices, and please check all of the rooms in the house before you buy it.
I can't find the exact comment, but a lot of people commented under my last video about Zozo the demon that he's just a creepypasta and that it's not real. And I get it, it's understandable why people would think that. If you search Zozo today, you're gonna get like YouTube videos, Reddit stories, scary thumbnails, just things like that. Which then it just makes people think that it's something that was created alongside Jeff the Killer. But that's not actually where the story begins. The version of Zozo that went viral online absolutely became internet folklore. But it didn't start out that way. You know, thousands of people copy each other's stories and exaggerate the details, and it soon turned into one of the biggest paranormal legends on the internet. And I guess that's why people refer to it as a creepypasta, but it's not. It's way more than that. The name itself is actually older than the internet itself. Long before social media even existed in like the 1800s, there were reports of people who have participated in seances where they were in contact with something that called itself Zozo, you know, whenever they were playing on the Ouija boards, on the playing boards. There are so many other accounts too, starting from like 2010. I think this guy's name is like Darren Evans. He also shared his own Zozo paranormal experience. There was also an episode of Ghost Adventures with Zach Baggins. There are things in this world that we will never fully understand. We want answers. Anyways, I want answers about what the fuck is following me, because I also did a seance in the basement of my parents' home when I was a young kid with my cousin Kai. So, short story, I'm gonna like kind of walk you through what happened. I've already told it a bunch of times on here, okay? So basically, we crawled up into my parents' like little crawl space attic, okay? It was one of those like ones that you push up and have to get into that way. It doesn't have like a staircase or anything that leads to it. You have to like find your way up there. Basically just an unfinished attic, okay? Where we found boxes up there, and we ended up finding a really old Ouija board, which we were like, fuck yeah, this is so cool. Mind you, we were about like, I think I was about like 9 or 10 years old, and my cousin was like a couple years younger than me, so we were like really little kids. So we found this stuff up there, and we ended up taking it down into the basement, where we found my mom's little like tea candles, you know, those little white tea candles. We lit them all into a circle and did a little seance, and we ended up contacting what referred to himself as Zozo. But ever since this day, I have been followed and harassed by something. Some kind of entity never leaves me alone. It just hops with me from apartment to apartment to apartment, and now it's in my house with me. But I do have another story for you guys, because you guys have been asking about like what has happened. This one involves my cat, so if you don't want to hear anything sad about an animal, you can go, but it's not too terrible, okay? Like, just stay, okay? Just stay with me. You can hold my hand. So anyway, there was this one night where I was living in my apartment. I was living by myself. I had 2 cats and 2 dogs at the time. And I remember I was just sitting in the living room kind of watching TV before I was going to go to bed, when all of a sudden I hear my cats running down the hallway. So they're running and playing. I'm just like, this is not abnormal, because they always like to play with each other, whatever. My cat Helen, she hated when Maybelline would like jump on her back, so I was just like, okay, they're just playing, they're just whatever. I'm sitting on the couch, and then I see Helen come running around, which the hallway is like behind me, so I'm sitting on the couch like up here watching, you're the TV, I'm sitting here watching the TV. Helen comes running around like from here so I can see her go in front of my feet, and all of a sudden I hear this bang, so I turn my head around, and I fucking see Maybelline get lifted off of the ground and whipped down the fucking hallway. This poor cat, I sobbed, okay? I'm about to start fucking crying right now. She's safe now anyway, but she fucking flew into the wall so hard it left a little dent in the wall. It was horrifying. That same night, I grabbed all my animals and I went to stay at my mom's house, which I don't know why I thought that would make a difference, because it follows me. That night at my mom's house, I slept in my old childhood bedroom, which lots of other stories about things that happened to me in that bedroom too, and that house in general. But anyways, I'm sleeping in there with all of my animals when all of a sudden, every single one of the dogs in the house, my 2 dogs and my mom's 2 dogs, start freaking the fuck out. None of us heard anything else. Like, they woke us up out of a dead sleep. Turned on all the lights in the house, and nothing was there. But what was weird was that every single window in the house had been opened up, when my mother never leaves them open, especially at night, because of another thing that happened. That's another story. It's also deep down on my page somewhere. I've told it before, but I'll tell it again. Somebody tried to break in and steal me, and well, whatever. Okay. But yeah, so that happened, and I ended up rehoming my cats. Okay, they're safe now. Got to stay in the family. They're living with one of my aunts. I do get to see them every now and then, and I know that they're happy and healthy and not being thrown down a hallway by an entity that we can't see.
This morning, my girlfriend's sister sent an image in their family's group chat because their dad noticed something in it when he had seen it a few days ago. It was a picture taken of her window in her room at around 2 a.m. According to her, she took the photo because she had heard a scraping noise outside, like nails on a chalkboard. Then her dad sent a message that said, I think you have a curious raccoon outside your window. Upon looking at the cropped image, there's very clearly a face looking through the window. It looks almost human. This photo was taken by some friends from our church. They insist that they were completely alone at the time and that there was no one standing behind them. But when you look at the image, you can clearly make out what appears to be a person, or something trying to look like a person, watching them from the background. This is a photo of what looks like a humanoid creature in a rural town in Mexico. It was taken in 2020 by my brother. He, along with two other elderly people, saw it crossing the road into the bushes. They described it as being around 3 feet tall and walking with a limp.
So I know we talked about the Amazon being one of the most dangerous places on earth, but why are we not talking about Siberia? I recently came across it and I had no idea that this town located in Siberia, the winters get so cold that it goes down to -90. -90. They literally have to leave their cars running in the winter because if they shut their cars off, all of the fluids and everything in the engine and everything is going to freeze to death, and the cars are going to be inoperable for like the whole winter. They only get about 3 months of like summer, but to them summer is like 20 degrees, 30 degrees. The rest of the year is like grueling -90-degree weather. If you walk outside and you're out there for too long, in just a few minutes, I thought somebody was looking at me. Your literal eyelashes will freeze. You can get frostbite in just a few minutes if you have any sort of uncovered skin and you happen to be outside in the cold. Yet people like live in this town. Like, this is the name of the town. I don't want to butcher it. People live there. And it's just like everyday life. Apparently, I'm not sure how true this is, but they do say that they don't have a lot of plumbing in that area because it will freeze. So a lot of the times, all they really have are outhouses, which means that in like -90-degree weather, if you have to use the bathroom, you have to go outside in the little shack, outback house. Apparently, electronics can't handle the cold very well, so like if you're out there with like your phone or whatever, the battery's gonna drain extremely fast. Even burying a person, if somebody passes away, you have to bury them in the ground. That's almost nearly impossible because the ground is literally frozen stiff. Oh, and just to like jot your memory, I guess, is that how you say it? Jot your memory. Do you remember the hikers that went missing in like the 1960s that came back up with like their tongues and their eyes and their body parts missing and no one could understand what happened to them? That happened over there. That happened in that part of the world. This was never solved. So let me ask you, if somebody was to give you $1 million, would you spend 24 hours?
No, because if I'm camping and all of a sudden there's this random little girl just staring at me and my friends, I'm looking away and minding my business. Welcome back to another episode of Creepy Corner with Ken. Like always, if you guys have any stories that you want me to share on my page, you can send it to the email that's in my bio. But let's go ahead and get into the story. The guy writes that he's 17 years old and that him and 5 other friends that he had were going on a camping trip. Pretty popular camping spot just outside of their town. They were too young for bars and stuff, so they would go there to have fun. After hanging out for a while, drinking and smoking and whatnot, they decided that they all wanted to go on a walk. Said that there was a very secluded country road right by the camping site, and they decided it would be a good idea to go on this walk late at night. In my opinion, going on a walk down a very creepy, dark country road in the middle of the night while you've been drinking and smoking sounds like a horrible idea, but whatever. He said that they were all having a really good time, joking around and laughing while they were on this walk, and one of his friends ended up turning around and immediately stopped in his tracks. He looks back at his friends and says, "There's a girl behind us." The group just thought he was messing with them and just decided to ignore him. He said while the rest of the group was laughing it off, this guy was still standing still in his tracks, just staring at the girl. Said he didn't want to fall for the made you look joke, so he very cautiously turned his head over his shoulder, and that is when he does see the girl behind them. He said although it was super dark out that he could see her clear as day. She was no more than 10 or 11 years old and she was wearing a white floral dress. Now this totally freaked the group out because there's not a house nearby anywhere, and that she was definitely way too young to be all alone at night, especially in this dark country road. So now this whole group is just staring back at this little girl, and he decides that he's finally gonna break the ice and just says, "Hi, are you okay?" He gets no response, and his girlfriend at the time then yells, Are you sure you're okay? Do you need anything? Where's your mom? They still had no response from her, and so one of the other guys in the group just goes, guys, this is ridiculous. She clearly doesn't want anything to do with us, so let's keep walking. Yeah, all I know, if we keep walking, I'm walking backwards. There's no way am I going to turn my back on this creepy little girl in the middle of the night. They said they really didn't know what to do with her not responding. After they debated back and forth a little bit, they decided to keep on walking down the road and see if she would follow them. Continued their walk down this country road late at night, and after about 10-15 steps, they looked back to see if she was following, and she wasn't. She was just still standing in the same spot. They go about 20 more steps forward, and they look back, and she's still in the same place, but now she's just looking up at the sky. And then out of nowhere, she just starts skipping straight towards them while singing this very creepy nursery rhyme. Why when stories are about creepy little kids, there's always a creepy nursery rhyme to follow them. As she's skipping towards them, singing this nursery rhyme, she eventually stops singing, stops skipping, and is just sprinting right towards them. When I tell you, my soul would have left my body. I literally would have passed away in that moment. She's just sprinting at full speed towards them, and all of a sudden, she just vanishes into thin air. He said him and his friends just looked around everywhere, thinking that she had to have ran off somewhere, but she was nowhere to be found. They had no idea what to do. What you need to do is go back home to the campsite and get in your tent and go to bed. One thing about me is I hate little kid ghosts. They are the creepiest of creepy. And when that little girl would have vanished into thin air, I would have had a whole heart attack. But first of all, I would have never thought it was a good idea to go walk down a secluded, dark country road in the middle of the night after I've been drinking. But that's just me. But I hope you guys enjoyed another episode of Creepy Corner with Ken. Like I said at the beginning of this video, if you guys have any stories that you want me to share on here, you can send to the email that's in my bio. Y'all make smart choices, and please don't go down any secluded country road in the dark.
What would you do if you woke up at 3 a.m. and found your significant other barefoot standing on the edge of your roof? If you're just seeing this video for the first time, this is actually a part 2 and 3 to a story that I read yesterday. So if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you do so just so you can keep up with the story. But if you saw yesterday's video, there's actually been an update. So here's part 2 and 3. I posted here about 14 hours ago about my girlfriend's behavior. A lot of you told me to get her medical help first, and I'm listening. We have an appointment with her primary care doctor tomorrow morning, and I'm pushing hard for a neurology and sleep study referral. But I need to update because last night was the worst yet. Around 2:50 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the bedroom window sliding open. She was already halfway out onto the roof again, barefoot, same blank face. This time, I caught her before she fully stepped out. When I grabbed her arm, she was freezing cold again, and for a second, her head snapped towards me, so fast it didn't look natural. Her eyes focused on me for the first time during one of these episodes, and then her mouth opened and a voice that was not hers came out, low, almost calm, and completely clear. You're running out of time. Then she blinked, looked confused, and asked why we were standing by the open window. She had no memory of any of it. She started crying when I told her what happened. And there's more. Yesterday afternoon, she disappeared for almost 2 hours. When she came back, her hands were covered in dirt, and there were deep scratches on both forearms that she swore she didn't feel happen. She also had a small, perfectly round bruise on the side of her neck that wasn't there this morning. She's been talking in her sleep almost every night now. Last night, after I got her back in bed, I stayed awake listening. The voice kept repeating the same phrase. They're already inside. She won't last. He's next. I recorded about 40 seconds of it on my phone. The voice does not sound like her at all. I'm sleeping in the same bed, but I kept one eye open. I've started locking the windows from the inside and putting a chair under the bedroom door handle, but I'm terrified it's not going to be enough. I know a lot of you are going to say medical first, and I agree. We're going tomorrow, but I also need to know if anyone has ever seen something escalate this fast. The blank stares are lasting longer during the day now. Sometimes she just stops mid-sentence and looks at me like she's waiting for instructions. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Any advice while we wait for the doctor's appointment would help. And that's the end of update 2, and then there's update 3. Update 3, it's 3:30 a.m. and I don't know what to do. I posted the last update less than 2 hours ago. After I finished writing it, I finally laid down next to her, still half awake, still locking the windows and putting the chair under the door. I must have dozed off for maybe 40 minutes. I just woke up to the bedroom completely empty. Every single window in the house is wide open. The front door, the back door, the side door, all open. The chair is on the floor. The window locks I set are undone. I ran through the house screaming her name. Nothing. Then I looked out the kitchen window. She's standing in the middle of the backyard, barefoot, still in the same clothes, holding a lit candle with both hands in front of her chest, like she's offering it to something. Completely still, not reacting to me yelling, not looking at me, just standing there in the dark with the flame. I don't know if I should go out there. I don't know if I should call the police, the hospital, or what. The doctor appointment is still hours away. I'm terrified to leave her alone out there, and I'm terrified to go near her. So what should I do now? And that's the end of the update. So yeah, that's the end of the update. If there are any more, come tomorrow or the next few days, I can update the story if you guys like it. Again, this is a story found on the internet, so take it with a grain of salt. However, OP is adamant that this is a real life event that is happening in their lives real time. So you know, if there's any more updates, I will update. This is a very interesting story. I do feel bad for OP and their girlfriend if, you know, the story is true. The decline seems to be going really, really fast. And the last update was a few hours ago. So if the timeline tracks, the girlfriend will have her appointment tomorrow. So we'll see if there's any updates. But yeah, whether the story is true or a figment of OP's imagination, I would like to know the conclusion of it. So if there's any more updates, I will make another video. But if you've experienced anything similar, ongoing or in the past, and would like to share any advice for anyone that is watching that is either going through something similar, or maybe OP might come across this, feel free to leave it down below. Or if you have your own spooky experiences and would like to email it to me, you feel free to do that as well. My email is in my bio. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. This is my first like part 2, part 3 update video. So yeah, let me know your thoughts below.
My husband really hates it when people interrupt him while he's talking. My husband Cole and I have been married for 3 years and been in a relationship for 5. He has a 6-year-old son named Adam from a previous relationship. We try to act like we're one big happy family, but Adam still doesn't like me. His entire life, his mother has convinced him that I am the reason they split up, but we met months after they broke up. Cole has been the love of my life the last few years, and I can honestly imagine spending the rest of my life with him. He grew up in a home with very overbearing parents who controlled everything about his life. And because of this, he has a hatred of people who interrupt him while he's talking. So his friend Emmett was over and they were in the living room having a conversation. I rushed into the room and tried to ask a question. Cole immediately started scolding me and cut me off every single time I tried to talk. He then spent half an hour reprimanding me while Emmett sat there with a smirk on his face. Eventually, Cole demanded to know what was so important that demanded me to be so inconsiderate. So I got them to follow me to the kitchen and heard Cole's scream of anguish when he saw Adam's lifeless body. I calmly explained that he had been having an allergic reaction and I had been trying to get his EpiPen from him.
We listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me give you guys a story time of when my aunt got married into a family that practices witchcraft. So my aunt had been dating this boy or whatever for the longest time, and my grandmother would tell her that she feels like this boy's mother is up to no good, but like my aunt was obviously heavily in love. She did not want to hear nothing. It was like when you tell her something about this man, it was like it went inside. I feel like it didn't even go through because she would just look at you and not answer. Fine, baby boy decides, no man, it's time for me to give my wife the title of being a wife, okay? And so they got married or whatever, and then there was a time where they were telling her the rules of the family, right? And I was there, so I was sitting with her, whatever, and they were like, if this family, guys, they kept on emphasizing on the point of if this family is doing witchcraft, you do witchcraft with them. And they would ask her like how she feels about like animals, like does she love animals? If a family has a pet monkey, you go and feed that pet monkey and you don't say anything to people because that's the family secrets. They were emphasizing a lot on witchcraft, okay? And I didn't really get it, but I was like, Anyways, so okay, fine. A couple of months down the line, man, I realized that my aunt doesn't come like to visit as often as she used to, because every single time there's a ceremony, there's an unveiling, there's something, she's never there. And like when I asked my grandmother when last did she see her, my grandmother would tell me that this person has been gone since the day she got married. We only communicate with her via phone. Now, this is not my mom's mother, okay? This is my sister's grandmother. My grandmother's sister, sorry. My grandmother's sister. So I went to go visit her at one point, and I remember we were, as we were sleeping, whatever, I heard something like run on top of the roof. Like it was just running on top of the roof. And so I got scared and I held on to my grandmother. My grandmother immediately woke up and she was like, whoever is trying to try me, God will find you. She was praying. She's praying, she's throwing things. She has like a bucket. She went to go get a bucket with water, and I don't know what she put inside that. And she was doing it with like a broom. Not a broom, and like, yeah, it was a, almost those brooms that you use and you have to bend when you're sweeping with it. It's not the ones that have like the pole. That it's like, you're not going to get me, run away, you devil. And she was praying. I was kind of laughing inside the blankets, like, damn girl, you really praying, you really going in on her. And she kept on praying, and then this thing fell. Right, it fell. My grandma was like, yeah, you have the wrong one. I'm like, My grandmother switches on the light. She didn't even switch on the light when she was doing this. Switches on the light, opens the door. I'm like, girl, where are you going? She's like, follow me if you want to go see. I'm like, So I follow her, whatever. We walk around the room. We don't find anything. She walks around the yard. She keeps on praying and she's like, doing her thing. And then we find like a log, like a really big log, right? And then when we find this log, my grandmother's like, this was never here. Somebody must have put this here. And she just keeps on praying over everything that she finds. But we see footsteps, like a person was running around the yard. I'm like, I don't think I want to be here no more. Fine. After that same morning, my grandmother is making food, right? She's making porridge for the whole family, whatever. And I'm sitting with her inside the fireplace, the room where the stove that uses coal and wood is. I sit with her there, right? Fine. When I tell you, my aunt, guys, came running barefooted. She was wearing a dress, no underwear, no bra, nada. She's running. She gets home. She walks inside, like she opens the gate and she kneels down like in front of my grandmother and she starts crying. My grandmother's like, what's going on? How did you get here? Who brought you here? And she is crying. So she's crying, like they give her time to cry, they give her water, whatever. They put her in a room and I act like I'm rubbing her feet because like her feet were swollen. She seemed like somebody that ran from point A, which was 500 kilometers away, to point B. So she's crying, whatever, and I'm rubbing her feet because I don't want them to like tell me to get out of the room. So I'm rubbing her feet, just massaging her. They called my grandmother, they called my mom, and I don't remember who else they called. And so my aunt starts telling these people that basically she got married into a family that practices witchcraft. First day there, these people were already initiating her into witchcraft. They told her that they are bathing her with things and they're going to help her, whatever. Whole time they were initiating her into witchcraft. She's like, every single time at 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. they used to wake up and go work. And she's like, you had to make sure that you work and before the sun comes out. She's like, she was always tired. Like, basically, if you know that the sun is coming out at 6, at 5:30, you must be done with your things. She's like, they used to say, like, her husband's mother was a traditional healer, but she was posing at that, but she was really a witch doctor. So people would come to her and be like, I want you to bewitch as so and so, and then she'd be like, okay. And then my aunt is like, she's the one that had to like fly and go and find these people, and she was tired. Like, she had been doing this for months and she was tired. She's like, yesterday she was on top of the roof. She was the one that was on top of the roof, and she's like, she wanted to show her mom, which is my grandmother, that she was there. And my grandmother kept on praying, and because she came as an evil spirit, she could not get inside the house to ask for help, right? And when she kept on praying, she had to leave. Apparently, she's like, they sent her to go and kill her own mother, my grandmother. And so she used that as an opportunity to come home, but then my grandmother started praying, and she's like, she heard me scream, whatever, and she was just crying. She was like, she's tired. That family is like busy, and she doesn't want to do that anymore. She's like, she realized that like she doesn't want to do anything because the first day that she was there was a lady that stayed next door to them who was pregnant, and she made that lady have a miscarriage, and they were using her baby for bad things. And she could see that this lady was depressed, and this lady would talk to her every morning, and she just felt bad, like she couldn't. But then again, she's like, she was scared of leaving because they told her, if you leave, we will kill you. If you tell anybody, we will kill you. And so she would see the things that they were doing, and she realized that there were people that used to pray 365, people that used to go to traditional healers, and those people were the ones that they were targeting, and they were like winning. So she was scared. So she's like, if they want to kill her, they should kill her. She's tired. My grandmother was like, I knew that family was a bad family, and I would tell her, I would tell you. And she's like, apparently she didn't know that the family did witchcraft, but the family had put a spell on her so that she doesn't listen to her family, because they realized that her mom is basically kind of like ruining their plans. Like she's showing, her mom is showing her who her boyfriend's family were, so they decided to marry her and then initiate her, and so she doesn't want to do this anymore. So after that, they took her, I think, to a traditional healer. They did the things. I wasn't there. I wasn't allowed to go this time. They took her there, whatever, and she stayed in the traditional healer's home for like a whole week, and then she came back after that. When I tell you, she's like, the things that she heard, the things that she saw. There was the first day, there was a dead chicken in front of the door that she was sleeping. Next thing, when she's sleeping, there are ants that are running all over the bed. She doesn't know what's going on. At night, there's always like a heat wave, like it's always hot at night, and she's just scared. Like it's hot, like to the point where you can tell that it feels like somebody's blowing a fan with hot air onto you. Do you get what I mean? And so like after that same Sunday, she went to the water, she came back, and everything was cool. The boyfriend was begging her. The boyfriend was like, babe, please, I still love you. And she wanted to go back so many times, but then she was like, there's no way he doesn't know what his mom is doing. There is no way. He's probably working with his mom, and they told him to go and beg her so that she comes back. Because at times she would always tell me that she wishes she could go back because their relationship was good before all of this started, but she has to be strong.
Because what do you do when you realize the guy you're dating is a serial killer? Welcome back to another episode of Creepy Corner with Ken. Like always, if you guys have any stories that you want me to share on here, you can send it to the email that's in my bio. But let's go ahead and get into this story. It is absolutely crazy. This girl writes that when she was a teenager, she started dating this guy that was a couple years older than her, and we're going to be calling him N. She said that he was exceptionally sweet and kind and just told her how she deserved the world. They never really broke up, ended up moving away, and so they just kind of agreed that they wouldn't date anymore, but they really never broke contact and would always find ways to still see each other. However, she writes, when she was 17, N ended up going to jail for stabbing his stepfather. He don't sound very sweet and kind to me. She said that they hadn't seen each other in almost a year at that point, and when he got out, he just said that he felt like he had no other choice in that situation. His stepdad even went to the hearings and said that his stepson wasn't to blame and that he made the bad mistake of cornering N when he was in a violent rage. I just feel like if N's mind went to stabbing someone, he is to be blamed. But, however, she notes that when N got out of jail, he was a completely different person. He seemed super mature. He had gotten a good paying job right away. He discovered the love of cooking and was super clean and organized. She said that they had started talking again and eventually decided to start dating again as well. He ends up finding a house to rent, and she said honestly things were going really good and that they had even started talking about moving in together. And that from time to time, he was starting to hint that he wanted to propose. But unfortunately, as some time went by, he started drinking again. And when he started drinking again, that's when he started acting really strange. And she said that she got the heebie-jeebies. He started lying to her, saying that he was headed to work, but then his coworker would show up at their house and ask where he was. She said that when she would confront him about it, he would just make up one lie after another, and she was over it and decided to leave him. She packed up some of the stuff that he had left at her place super neatly and took it to his mom's house for him to go get. She also writes that her and her friend changed some of the locks that they knew N had a key to, which is honestly pretty smart. I'll give her that. And she writes that sure enough, that night, N tried to go in to use his key, and when he realized that the locks had been changed, he just started cussing and was super mad and stormed away. She says that the next day, she went on a walk with her dog, and when she got back to her house, she realized that there was a drawing there that she had drew for N, and that when she turned it around, there was blood splattered all over it. And that's when I called 911. She said that she didn't know what to do with it, so she ended up just burning it outside. The next day, N calls her asking if he could come over just so that they could talk. She agrees, said it was fine, and that he could come over at 7:30. Now, why would you agree to come talk to this man when he just left a drawing with blood splattered all over it? I told you were really smart just a second ago, and I think I'm taking it back. However, it was 8:30 and he still hadn't shown up. That's when she gets a call from her aunt that N had actually broken into a woman's home. The girl had a gun and tried to shoot him, missed, and he took off and he was running towards her house, but that the police had caught up with him. She said that N only went to jail for 6 6 months. For some reason, the woman's house that he broke into, she didn't really want to cooperate with the police. They gave him very little time. Now, around this time, she started dating another guy that we're going to call S. And she said that the first time that her and S went out on a date in town, that they ran into N, and N just ripped off his shirt, threatening to fight the guy. She said that S was not intimidated at all by this guy and just kind of chuckled, laughed, and they both got in the car and left. She said that over a period of time, this would just kind of constantly happen. One night they were cuddling on the couch watching TV, and that's when they heard a sound on her back patio, and it was N. He ran off when they saw him, but the next morning when she went outside, she had seen bullets for like a rifle gun, and it looked like he had tried to throw it at their window. She said that she ended up moving away and actually marrying S, but one day they randomly bumped into N, but kind of shrugged it off as being very coincidental. No, ain't nothing about that coincidental. What are you talking about? This man has been stalking you. However, N had gone back to jail again for breaking into another woman's house. He got a minimal sentence and then he was out again. However, shortly after he was released, he was actually on national news attempting to abduct several children. After N was arrested for that, he did his time, he got out, and then immediately after that, he was arrested again for murdering a woman. What is wrong with this guy? What is wrong with the police? I need them to be investigating a little bit better, because why does this man keep getting out just to go back in? Keep this man in jail, please. It was rumored that he had killed this woman and then took her body and dumped her in this forest area that was near a mutual friend of his. He had also allegedly killed his cellmate, but he didn't get charged for this because the prison had mishandled a bunch of information and how they documented stuff. So he didn't get charged with that. And that while he's been in jail, he has attacked several women guards. She also writes that while he's been in prison, that they have still been trying to figure out with other missing women if it's tied to him, because a lot of it was the same type of situation. And she at this point honestly thinks that it is him and that they need to check more of that forest area because she's convinced that there are more bodies there. She said that she felt super guilty for a long time. She was super intimate with this person for a long time. And she feels like she should have seen the signs, and some of the signs that she did see, she didn't report or do anything about. But that until he had started drinking, she thought he really was a stand-up guy, minus stabbing his stepfather, I guess. She said that looking back, it really scares her that she could have easily been one of his victims, but that she thanks God every day that she wasn't hurt, injured, killed. Can't imagine me being with someone for so long to find out that they are a crazy person breaking into women's house, trying to abduct kids and killing women. That would mess with my head for so long. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Creepy Corner with Ken. Like always, if you have any stories you want me to share on here, send it to the email that's in my bio. But y'all make smart choices, and if you start seeing signs that the person you're with has serial killer tendencies, maybe report it.
Want to hear something scary? Have you ever played the game Bloody Mary? No? Me neither. Want to play it? Bloody Mary is one of the most popular widespread scary games to play. From movies to books to drinks, Bloody Mary is not only the most widespread, but also one of the easiest scary games to play. To begin the game, you only need yourself, a bathroom, a mirror, and a candle. You can play without a candle, but it's suggested to play with one. Next, go into the bathroom and shut the door behind you. Turn off all the lights and place your candle in front of the mirror and light it. Now stand directly in front of the mirror and begin to chant, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, with your eyes closed. There are different variations of the ritual. Some will say to turn on the faucet and spin while you chant. Others say to just chant. When your eyes open, you will be met with the sight of Bloody Mary staring back at you. This is one of the few games that I have played many, many times, and I maybe might be brave enough to play it in a future video, but I don't know, don't quote me. So although I'm not sure I'm brave enough to play it, who knows? Maybe you're sure. Good luck.
Paula Jean Weldon has been missing for almost 80 years, and these are the cases that I think about the most because I really wonder, are we ever going to find any kind of closure for these cases? On December 1st of 1946, Paula Jean Weldon was a sophomore at Bennington College in Bennington, Vermont. She was an art major, and at the time of her disappearance, she had decided that maybe she wasn't as interested in art as she once thought and was kind of contemplating changing her major. But she was a well-adjusted girl. She was an artist. She was a musician. She got along well with her family, but there were some reports that she might have been a little bit depressed around the time of her disappearance. The morning of her disappearance, she was scheduled to work the morning and lunch shift at the dining hall. After she got off work, she went to her dorm where she spoke with her roommate for a little bit before saying she was going to take a study break and go on a hike. She didn't tell her roommate where she was going, but she did leave the dorm at about 2:30 that afternoon. She was going to the Long Trail, which is a trail near the Bennington campus, I believe. But when she left, she didn't take any money with her, and she even left an uncashed check that her parents had sent her for living expenses. At about 2:45, she was hitchhiking near the campus when she was picked up by a motorist. He took her to he dropped her off near Route 9, which is about 3 miles from where this hiking trail started. Several people did see her on this hiking trail, with the last known sighting of her, confirmed sighting of her, was when she spoke to a man on a trail and she asked this man how far this trail went, and he told her it went all the way to Canada. Now, it's important to note that she was not dressed for the weather. That, like, at the time that she went out, it would have been fine, but there was a cold front coming in and they were expecting snow. But by nightfall, she had not returned to campus and snow started. They got about 3 inches that night. Paula would never be seen or heard from again, and her roommate didn't get suspicious until the next morning when she realized that Paula had never returned home. Now, at the time, the campus or the students on this campus were required to let security know if they were leaving past 11 p.m. at night, and they also had to check back in. Paula hadn't done any of those things, so she never returned to campus. Then, when she didn't return for her Monday morning classes, that's when security let her family know that something was wrong. There was a search performed for Paula. Unfortunately, there was no state police in the area at the time of her disappearance, and this really did hinder the searching that they were doing for her. But eventually, officials from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York stepped in to try to help look for Paula. Nothing was ever found, and no one knows what happened to her. Even as it started getting warmer, they thought maybe she had had an accident while she was hiking, but they didn't find anything. She simply vanished. Police started looking into her background, thinking that maybe she had left on her own accord, but this didn't really check out either because she was a really well adjusted student, and there were some reports, like I said before, that she might have been a little bit depressed at the time of her disappearance, but her family is adamant that this is not something she would have done. While there is no evidence that there was foul play in this case, it does seem awfully weird to me that she just disappeared without a trace and no one knows where she went. There was some good news at the end. Her father really did lobby hard for them to get state police after her disappearance so that this would never happen to another family. So, what are your thoughts on this? Considering she's been gone for almost 80 years, do you think this family will ever get closure? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and follow for more true crime.
Bro, what's going on around?
Imagine someone who looks exactly like your mom trying to wake you up, only to realize that your mother's face isn't hers. Let me read you a story. This happened when I was about 27 years old, and I still remember it as if it happened yesterday. It was a winter night around 3 a.m. I was sleeping in my room when I felt that my mother had come in to wake me up. I was awake enough to understand what was happening, but I didn't want to get up. I kept pulling the blanket over my head and told her I don't want to wake up. She tried to pull the blankets away 3 times, and I resisted every time. While this was happening, I suddenly realized something very important. The door to my room was locked from the inside with a key. I always sleep with the door locked. It was impossible for my mother to enter my room. The moment I realized that, I decided to look at her. I lifted the blanket. The body and the clothes looked exactly like my mother, but the face was not hers. Her face was completely black, and her hair was white and messy. In real life, my mother had fair skin, and her hair looks nothing like that. The strange part is that she never tried to hurt me. She didn't say anything scary. She only kept trying to wake me up. I was afraid, but I stayed surprisingly calm. I pretended to be asleep again, pulled the blanket over my head, and eventually fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I did was check the door. It was still locked from the inside, exactly as I expected. No one could have entered my room that night. Nothing unusual happened that day, and this experience never happened again. To this day, I still don't know how to explain it. Was it an extremely realistic dream, a sleep-related experience, or something else? Has anyone experienced something similar, realizing that the person in front of you could not possibly be there, yet seeing them and even talking to them as if they were completely real. And that's the end of the story. So would you have looked again or stay hidden under the blankets? I would have stayed hidden under the blankets. But let me know, what would you do in this situation?